Rachel, you just let us know when to go and let folks in.
Okay, we should be live now.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and let folks in.
Tracy, it looks like most folks have connected their audio. Go for it.
Welcome everyone to a Friday afternoon PCEF Grant Committee meeting. I'm Tracy Smith, your facilitator for today. We'll move over into the agenda and overview. Well, first, I'm ahead of myself. We'll look at the virtual meeting participation checklist. Committee meetings are open to the public. The public will be invited to share their comments at around 3:05. At 4 o'clock, we will have a 5-minute break. At that time, there will be no online discussion. For guidelines for this afternoon, the chat box that will be used for introductions. Please make sure you introduce yourself. At other times, PCEF staff will not be responding immediately. They'll just be taking recording and doing follow-up after the meeting. For committee members, please remember to raise your hand when you want to share. The video, we are asking only committee members or presenters, in this case, committee members only, keep on video. Microphone will be in use, so please mute yourself, or PCEF will mute you as well. This meeting is being recorded, and closed captioning is on as well. So our agenda is, again, now we're doing the overview, which will be followed by introductions. At 3:05, we will have public comment. If I'll just say briefly, if you're thinking about public comment, please indicate that in the chat. If you're on your phone, use the *9 function to let PCEF staff know that you would like to share during public comment. We ask that you also keep your comments to 3 minutes. At 3:15, we will have discussion and recommendations on projects proposed in the first set of allocations. And you'll see here that is an action item, meaning that the committee members will be taking a vote. From 4 to 4:05, we will have a break. After the break, we will come back and continue with discussion and recommendations. At 4:50, we will have initial discussion on the process for the second set of allocations. At 5 o'clock, we will have close out the meeting. So that is our agenda. We'll move now to introductions, and I'll start with Michael, please.
Michael Eden Hill, PCEF member, he, him.
Faith?
Hey everyone. Sorry, a little bit of a strange place I am. It's great to see you all this afternoon. Faith Graham, committee member, she, her.
Maria?
Hello, Maria Sipin, they or she pronouns, PCEF committee member.
Megan?
Hi, everybody. Megan Horst, she, her pronouns, PCEF co-chair.
Robin?
Good afternoon, everybody. Robin Wang, PCEF committee member, he, him.
Alicia?
Good afternoon, Alicia Chapman, she, her pronouns, committee member.
D'Angelo?
Good afternoon, everybody. D'Angelo Moaning, PCEF committee member.
And I'm just checking to see, we have other committee members that will be joining. Oh, I see Ramfis, if you.
Hey everyone, sorry, challenge getting to my mute button. Hi everyone, Ramfis Gentino Viatoro, he, him, committee member.
Sam, if you would introduce yourself as well as your team.
Okay. Good afternoon, folks. I'm Sam Barrasso, PCEF Program Manager, he, him pronouns. And I'll want to make sure James introduces himself as he may chime in this evening. James.
Hi, everybody. Dan Valdez, he, him staff, or he, him, and PCEF staff.
All right. We will now move on to public comment. And Ted Lab, I have you up as sharing. I will check and Sam, I'm just double checking. I don't see Ted online.
I don't see him online
either. Sam, are there additional names?
Jason Skipton.
I'm sorry, Sam, you said?
Oh, Jason Skipton.
Okay, Jason, are you ready to share comments? If so, we welcome you at this time.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, go ahead.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for your time. I know, wow, like you all have had a marathon of meetings. So anyways, it's a Friday afternoon. Just want to say thanks. My name is Jason. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the executive director with Growing Gardens. And also been working with a really cool community-led regenerative agriculture coalition that's been coming together. It's representing about 20 plus organizations. I know you've all heard from us over these last couple of meetings, and just wanted to provide some updated context and really kind of look at some power mapping around our sector of regenerative agriculture and what we're really providing into our city. One in particular is looking at the size of our budgets. And collectively, we don't have all of the information in yet. We're about 2/3 of the information gathering so far, but collectively our budgets represent $86 million that are directly investing into regenerative agriculture and projects here in our city. And it also represents about nearly 500 jobs that are being created to work in regenerative agriculture. And that's impacting over 1 million Portlanders here in our city through our work and efforts as a coalition in regenerative agriculture. So again, just really want to highlight the importance of what's happening in regenerative ag and the organizations that are doing amazing work and collectively impacting priority populations for PCEF. So this is really me just coming back. I'm along for the ride with y'all. We're along for the ride with y'all to see what's happening and to continue to advocate for regenerative agriculture and investing in our private sector, investing in food system work, regenerative agriculture. And really, like, this is the time now to invest, because the longer we wait to invest in our food system, the harder it is going to become as the years go by. So thank you all for your time. Good luck today.
Thank you, Jason. Sam, has anyone else joined or identified themselves as wanting to talk during public comment?
Thank you, Tracy. Looking over at the chat box. No, so maybe I'll just attend a virtual audio call. If folks would like to provide public comment, please either raise your hand or indicate your interest in the chat box. We do not see Ted Labby here either. So I think if we don't see anyone pop up in the chat box in the next few seconds, Tracy, I think we're ready to move on.
Okay. I just want to check in real quick with Megan and Ramphis if you have any response to Jason's comments.
Is Ramphis on yet? I'm looking for him.
He's on.
Okay.
I'm here.
Ramphis, I went first last time. We have just fellow committee members. We've asked kind of going forward to just have a moment at each meeting when there's been public comment, either written or verbal, to at least acknowledge and not just move on. So that's why we're doing this, just to kind of make that transparent. And besides the oral testimony, we did receive, I think, one letter is what I see in the file from Portland Audubon Micah for today, and then a bunch last time. So Ramphis, do you want to make any comments?
Sure. No, I appreciate the testimony. I think regenerative agriculture is a really important key subject here, and just appreciate Jason, you taking the time to join us on this call. I know 3 to 5 can be a challenge for some folks. So appreciate you joining and your testimony and just highlighting the importance of sharing that we're thinking about how we prioritize priority populations and thinking through many of our conversations. Beyond that, I'll pause to kick it over to you, Megan.
Yeah, and I'll just say, like, we reflected on the themes we heard last time and kind of the additional comments. I find hearing from community when they support City Bureau funding, that's a helpful kind of layer for us to consider as we hear, because one of our review criteria is, has there been engagement and expressed need and interest from PCEF priority communities in this project? So, the letter from Audubon about tree planting and other, that's helpful to hear. And then just in terms of the Regenerative Agriculture Coalition kind of continually showing up over the last few, you all know that I'm a big advocate in them, but partly I will want us as a committee to continue discussing as we grapple with unexpected positive additional revenue to work on climate action in Portland, that we consider bolstering funds for community responsive grants, assuming we see higher than expected demand in RFPs 3 and 4 and for good quality projects, that we, alongside enabling more city access to funds, that we enable more community access to funds for regenerative ag, but not just that one, for other funding areas if there's a need, and for other elements of our CIP. This is the moment when we're amending the plan. So I'll encourage us to kind of keep that as part of our discussion today.
Thank you, Megan and Ramfis. So now we'll lead into the discussion on projects proposed for the first set of allocations. Sam, do you want to start us off and kick this off?
Thank you. Yes, so this is just a quick sequence on what has been, as folks have acknowledged, a quick series of meetings, and then some meetings ahead of us here. But we're here in the middle at February 2nd, following our meeting just a couple of days ago on Wednesday evening, where we're continuing the discussion and ideally decision on the first set of proposed allocations, and then hopefully begin discussing the process for the second set of proposed allocations, and then what will and may inevitably be future sets. And so this is where we are. This is the moment, a moment in time, and I think I just want to at this point just acknowledge that late last year, as we sort of came to the end of the climate investment planning process, we started talking about what does it look like for this committee's role to shift and start moving into the oversight and evaluation role, and started talking about dialing back and moving to every other month, as it gets us a chance to both better prepare for these meetings, better deliver, gather and pull together the content that's more reflective of the larger body of work that we've been funding over the past 2 years and will continue to fund as we move forward and as we implement the climate investment plan. And so we quickly, as is no surprise and it's not something we've done in the past, we've had to quickly pivot for news that have unfortunately made us be more dynamic and responsive to the situations than we expected. So I just want to, appreciate the committee for jumping into a quick succession of meetings after we said, we expected to kind of zoom back out. And the reality is that's not where we're at now. And yet it presented us with the unexpected surprise of having additional resources to allocate. And so we're going to continue on, but today is certainly an important milestone. And I look forward to meeting over the coming weeks and figuring out what it does look like to develop a cadence that many committee members have asked for, and a better preparation for as we have additional future in our projections and as our funding projections grow in the future, which as folks, just to say clearly here, are likely to do based on our city economist note that his forecast is conservative given our understanding of the fund, being better prepared and ready to be able to engage in these conversations. And playing that out. And so I look forward to getting to some of that discussion here later today, possibly, and if not today, in our subsequent meetings. I've just got a couple slides before we really begin to diving into the projects, but this is just an initial reminder for folks. As we got that initial notice from our city economist that our budget forecast was substantially off. Just a couple of weeks or a few weeks after the passage of the climate investment plan, we immediately started pulling bureaus together and saying, we ran the climate investment planning process over the past 9-12 months. We certainly centered and focused on community as part of our designing of programs. But at the same end, we acknowledge that that process wasn't centering government as a delivery mechanism. In some instances, community surface government as a specific delivery mechanism. And so, given the critical nature of our climate emergency work plan, we started with bureaus. Ultimately, we requested projects that had meaningful greenhouse gas emissions reductions as a core criteria requirement and demonstrable community benefits. I know that'll be probably the subject of some of the conversation, but those community benefits are going to take many different shapes and sizes and forms, from direct individual household benefits to low-income households to more generalized, broader universal benefits to the community at large, but some that may be more impactful for our priority populations. And so, I think that's a term that certainly has a lot there. And then some of the things outside of that we prioritized was things that alleviated pressure on the general fund, things that were shovel ready, in existing capital plans, and things that were implementation ready. Their existing program capacity or scope. And this may be instances where there's programming in bureaus that we knew and understood were otherwise going to likely be eliminated as part of budget shortfalls that had existing programming that was in alignment that we could support and continue and preserve. So in aligning really each of these things and making sure that we could square them away with what our core objective is, which is to invest in climate action projects that support environmental justice, social, economic, and environmental benefits for all Portlanders, including the development of diverse and well-trained workforce and contractor pool to perform this work. Now, tonight, what we'll be, or this afternoon, we usually meet in the evenings, what we're working through is, going through the Bureau project list again. And as a committee, you all can approve, modify, or reject proposals. You can add areas where, as part of modification, specific outcomes, prioritization, accountability measures you all want to see. And then subsequent to the action you all take, Council can subsequently accept, amend, or reject the committee's recommendations. And all of this will certainly turn us to, as many reflected, this has been a not good process, for one. Turning around and pivoting to and beginning to talk about what is a process for allocation number 2, which will inevitably come upon us pretty quickly. And so that's here just so for folks both to just place the fact that as imperfect as it is, we do have our budget timelines that are driven by state statutes, and that's a lot of what is driving this. And yet we know that what doesn't land here, that we will have to turn around and begin talking about what is a better process for allocation number 2. Now, on the next slide, I will show you all proposed language you all can take in the afternoon. It's going to be a slide that's going to come back at the end, but I want you all to just start conceptualizing language we're going to need to work on here together. And so when we ultimately do get to a proposal point today, option 1 is going to be, and we'll see the context for this in the next slides, is that the committee proposes recommending amending the climate investment plan to include allocation items 1 through 25, excluding item 6, which I'll describe shortly, as presented on the following slides. And then you can create an option number 2, and we'll get live on it and make amendments. Or you can take option 3. You can take no action or reject all the proposals, or something in between. Obviously, these are the sort of, there's more nuance in here. And so what these next 2 slides do is just list, and I'll roll back to this, I see a hand raised. These next 2 slides just list all the programs. So we'll go through in a subsequent series of slides and talk about each program to get folks to surface any remaining concerns, discuss some of the responses we've provided from the bureaus yesterday evening, and then yesterday night, and then get back to this.
Faith?
Thank you, Tracy. Sam, does this have to take an action of amending the CIP?
Yeah, the simple answer is ultimately yes. And what I say there, we funding cannot be spent if it's not essentially part of the climate investment plan. That as part of the adjustments we made in October of 2022, it was to frame and set the climate investment plan as the bounding document to, there's going to always be decisions on specific grant investments, specific terms, but overall, if it's not within the climate investment plan, we can't be working on it.
So the community responsive grants that's why they're in the community investment plan.
Climate investment, yep, correct.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So we can come back to these slides, but maybe what I'll just acknowledge here before we move to the next slides is just one place, for instance, as we're going to touch on the Portland Water Bureau's projects first, and then the hydroelectric projects, is based on the conversation you all had last Thursday and then this past Wednesday. There's both been internal staff discussions and discussions within the Water Bureau and the hydroelectric project. And as part of those discussions, they have decided to withdraw allocation item number 6. This is the funding contribution that was going to support the reserve fund for the hydroelectric project, in part because I think there's just a recognition that we do need to work probably on a broader policy around how we're working on reserves and whether or not and how we fund reserves. So, and that certainly is directly in contribution to the response to the conversations that were had here. But I just want to start with acknowledging that immediately, because I've struck it out on this list because the conversation begun there. We've kept it here, but wanted to name and acknowledge that. And I so that one, you all can spare that conversation till another time, but also just share that as we move through. Okay. And then this is something we just put together to visually show the allocations and how they're going to the different, what they're proposed, what they look like as you look at the breakout across the different bureaus. So what you see at an overall level, at least over this 5-year sum, is that, and that sum does include that $2 million for the hydroelectric project. So you'd have to take that out mentally, but would be that the largest portion would go to the Portland Bureau of Transportation, followed by Parks, and then the Bureau of Environmental Services. And so that is the circular chart to your left. And then to your right, you've got the allocations as best as we could break them down into the different funding areas. And as you see here, the largest is into green infrastructure, captured largely by the funding that's moving into Portland Parks and Recreation, as well as the Bureau of Environmental Services. Following a close really tie effectively between clean energy investments and then investments into transportation decarbonization. Then there's sort of this other climate projects, and then there's really, you're gonna, as you saw in the responses from bureaus, there's a lot of different efforts around workforce and contractor development as part of their programming. As far as direct funding going into a specifically designed program, there's that $840,000 associated with the Portland Parks and Recreation's proposed arborist training program.
Megan?
Yeah, I don't know if you're going to get to this, Sam, so maybe I'm just teeing you up, but I have a couple of reflections or questions that this slide, which I think is very helpful, inspire. One is, well, it would be really great to see the combined allocation totals with the CIP as well, to get a sense of, I know our code no longer requires us to balance any certain percentages among the funding areas, but I think there's still rationale to consider like the balance of that across all of our funds together. And I will beat the drum to say regenerative agriculture isn't even on here, and it was the tiniest part of the CIP. So it is getting diminished importance here, which raises need in my mind to fund it in future allocation processes. Another and workforce is pretty slim here, which is a little bit surprising to me, because as we were going through the projects, I had a sense of there being a fair amount of workforce, but I guess I'm realizing that's not true. And I suspect that would disappoint, especially the workforce focused members of our committee. So I guess I would just like you to comment on that. And last, comment I have, thinking about the Portland Climate Action and Emergency Work Plan, I think some of this balance aligns with, where they see the priority areas as you've called out, and I'm happy about that. But overall, a comment I have that I emailed with you is, I see here almost 400 million for city agencies. If we look back to the original CIP, there's another several hundred million for city agencies. And I counted up only 180 specifically allocated to community orgs through the community RFP process. There's some other going through some of the strategic program areas, but the exact amount is hard to calculate because it'll depend if they qualify, if they're the ones. So I'm just noticing that on the balance of this would now put us up to over $1 billion, that the vast majority of it's going to city agencies, which is not, I think what the spirit of PCEF that we thought was. So I'm just noticing that as a bit of an alarm call and wondering if we want to talk about that, debate that, suggest that we want to not continue that pattern after, like it's a thought I have. But my counting of 180 million, I was questioning with you because I don't know, if I have that quite right, but I'd like your comments on that.
Yeah, both all great points. And we figured, we knew that this was going to raise some of those questions. One, I think the sum that we've calculated, it's around 200 million, partially capturing the capacity building resources and some of the other programming, mini grants, other things that are exclusive. And that's 200 million that's exclusive to nonprofit organizations. So I think I just want to acknowledge that's an important term in large part because we do expect to contract with a lot of nonprofit organizations as part of our other strategic programs, whether it's it's specifically the particular role that the groups are taking. So, but in terms of funding opportunities that are exclusive to nonprofit organizations, it is about 200 million in the climate investment plan. Moving back to just the question, your observations on regenerative ag are absolutely correct, and I think those warrant conversations. And I think in many regards, we're currently in the midst, and we have about a week and a half or so to go to close out our next community responsive grant round. And I think that's going to be revealing once we get to the evaluation on exactly what's both the community's desires, what does our evaluation sort of look like in terms of what we believe is out there in terms of strengths of projects. And it's something we will be able to turn back and bring back and have, I believe, a robust conversation on how are we missing the mark based on what we're seeing in that evaluation. And then one thing I think, this was certainly in terms of the allocations by funding area, this was certainly, it was our best cursory effort to do so at this level. We know that as part of the programming, in terms of explicit workforce development, Portland Parks and Recreation named a particular program. We do expect that there is a significant amount of resources and workforce development moving through the Bureau of Environmental Services as part of a lot of the programming they do with community-based organizations. And we expect that some of the other programs will have similar, maybe smaller programs that are going to be part of that. And OMF is one notable bureau as they talk about their fleet management and some of the training that they're going to do. It wasn't carved out in the way that Portland Parks and Recreation did so as part of their arborist training program. I think the other thing that I would just acknowledge is a lot of that workforce development certainly happens on the outside. And so that's something that also equally, when we come back to the climate investment plan, review this most recent round of community responsive grants to see what sort of applications came in, where are we missing the mark, and what type of workforce development are we seeing, and what type are we missing the gap in. And I know that's been an area where we've been trying to develop a better nuanced understanding of that. So I think that there's still a tremendous amount to learn here, and I suspect that we'll have a lot of good material to use as part of our evaluation of how do we adjust and refine our processes over the coming, we know that those award processes for this current round won't happen until the summertime, but we'll have a fairly decent sense by the time we get ourselves into late spring.
Yeah, I just want to comment back. So the first thing about the balance to nonprofits, 200 million of and over 1 billion, that only adds up to 40 million a year, which is on the very low end of what voters initially passed and thought. So I'm sensitive to that reality now as we have like unexpected and wonderful extra revenue. That's a balance I want to increase because that was and I'm glad we're holding that stable, that minimum 40 million commitment, but I want us to increase that if we're seeing expected revenue and not continue the trend towards lots and lots of city stuff. That's at least a bias I have. Curious with the rest of the committee, at least to be part of this, at least some of this future. And then another comment is on workforce. And I mean, I think part of what's happening here is workforce as seen through contracting, but I also want to see the city as an important workforce itself. And I don't think it historically has been known to be a workforce or an employer. I don't think of low income and BIPOC and kind of the PCEF priority communities in large numbers, although PCEF money is a chance for that to be more intentional and thought into programming and staffing choices. And I'm curious if the bureaus, and including in the strategic program, have given good thought to apprentice to in-house internship programs, bringing up young folks. I'll wear my professor hat for a little bit, and I work at the largest institute, the most affordable public research institution, a block away from the city of Portland. And I don't know if I see great pipelines for our university is now majority students of color at the undergraduate level, and I don't know if I see pipelines into the city of Portland for many of them. Well, good paying jobs doing the climate action work. So I'm curious if there's been really robust dialogue about how the city is actually one of the workforce development players, probably one of the biggest ones in the city.
This is a good conversation. I mean, in part because of our own experiences within the Bureau of working closely with Portland State University and bringing in students and seeing some of that pipeline, and some of those pipelines didn't work so well. But I think this is an important conversation that we welcome bringing together with some of our other Bureau leadership to speak to it and have a more focused conversation on this. I think I hear you, Megan. I think it's really I know that we're one entity and we've certainly been hyper focused on the work at hand. And yet there are many bureaus that have been at this that have had long-standing robust partnerships with PSU and others. And we're happy to follow up and kind of try to bring that in a more holistic way to say, what does this look like across the city, and maybe not just across, obviously, our bureau, which we can probably do a closer job or a better job of speaking to.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm mentioning PSU because it's my employer and I work with a lot of young people, but of course there's other sorts of technical schools, community colleges, other pipelines for young people to find good paying climate justice work at the city in the future. So I'm just using PSU as my personal example, but it's not the only one. And yeah, I would love to be in conversations about that. I would love to see our leveraging of when we're allocating PCEF funds, that is part of the conversation.
I think the one maybe just other comment in thread, and it's just to acknowledge the fact that there is tremendous amount of community need. PCEF was born in response to that need because community saw that need. And yet, I think that we've always struggled with what, PCEF was at the ballot measure, which actually was about 30 to 40 million was what the communication was then, to what became reality when it became part of the city, at one point 50 to 70, then 40 to 60, when some payers were trimmed from that. And then we've become something substantially more because they're changing economic patterns and then the underlying realities of those and the entities that are paying into the fund. And so that largely did spur the changes given the scale of the program, because I think what many folks, and I've heard directly shared with me, is that if folks understood that PCEF would be at the scale that it is today, they would not have designed strictly an avenue that invests solely in nonprofit organizations, because we need to be leveraging all of our institutions. I think this is an evolving conversation to see what does that capacity look like and how do we grow that, given that it will take time for our organizations, our community to grow into that. And I think what I'd love to see, and I hope in these conversations, is how much our public sector partners can be part of facilitating that growth. As imperfect as this is. Okay. So I'm going to start with the first bureau up on our list here and their projects. First up is Portland Water Bureau. And again, we've got 3 projects as part of their proposed portfolio, and we'll move to hydroelectric project, which is the sister bureau within the bureau. But first is the low-income home water repair program expansion, energy efficiency work focused on their facilities, and then some of the renewable energy work where they're generating energy at their facility. And so within this, I think some of the core questions that came up was around the emissions reductions associated with the low-income home water repair program. I think in their responses to us, and hold up, I want to pull my notes up. What they shared was that, that there's range of emissions reductions associated with addressing leaks because of the energy used to both treat the water and then both clean the water, deliver the water, and then ultimately treat the water on the other side. And that goes both for service line leaks as well as running toilet leaks. And so there's various numbers, and it ranges from the lower end of 60 kilograms per year of avoidable emissions per household to upwards of several hundred pounds. I think what you see here is in the spectrum of emissions reducing projects, this is going to be on the lower end per dollar invested. And we don't have an exact figure, and I would just generally characterize on sort of the low, medium, high. This is going to be on the lower end. What you get here with these projects are going to generally be higher bill savings. Given, as folks know, and our water rates are higher because we have cleaner water and we have better for cleaning of our water on the other side in terms of treatment of our water in our infrastructure there. And so this is going to largely materialize in higher household bill savings and benefits. And I would say on the, certainly emissions reductions, but relative to potentially other investments in the lower end. So that's the best way I'd characterize it. Whereas I would say on the high end are going to be some of your Office of Management fleet project is going to be on the extremely high end, because that is doing a fuel switching, and that's going to be on the much higher end. Whereas in that instance, maybe some of the community benefits are going to be lower. That just gives you some of them. And then just some of the responses for folks just did share some of their contracts that they have with minority business enterprises to do some of the micro hydro work at Washington Park, and contractors they selected that would be taking on that work, and then and some of the work that they've got to do the energy efficiency work associated with our operations facility. And if I recall right, that was a women-owned business enterprise. So they spoke to some of that as just clear examples of both their intent and commitment to doing so, and some of what they expect to try to do as part of their solar assessment and expansion work. But that's what I want to share, that they're broadly capturing some of the response, and then see if there are other reflections there from committee members.
Robin?
Hi, thanks for kind of summarizing this. I want to comment about the water leak repair. I did some of the back of the envelope math, and yes, indeed, there's not much from a carbon reduction perspective. It's actually quite expensive. It's the math that I did is it's $50,000 per metric ton. That's really expensive. And I also did some back of the envelope calculations, and from the data that I got from the memo, we could just write a check of $149,000 to low-income households to reduce their water bills, and then spend about another $150,000 on some other kind of more efficient GHG reduction projects in PCEF's portfolio, and achieve the same carbon benefits. And again, back of the envelope math, that from instead of 2.5 million, we're talking about $800,000. And it's money that could be deployed to a nonprofit, or some of the other areas that we're talking about. So I just want to comment that that is really expensive, and I think there are better ways of using PCEF's money. But on the flip side, that's 2.5 million out of 300 million. So I acknowledge that it's a relatively small amount, but I just wanted to comment on that. Thank you.
And Robin, I think I appreciate that comment. I think what I certainly don't want to speak for our colleagues at Water Bureau, but I think what I would acknowledge just beyond the potential bill savings associated with the program is I have to assume that addressing water leaks in households beyond just addressing the extra cost of the water savings, this probably has its own benefits, but I don't want to go beyond my understanding. And I'd encourage that sort of dialogue to understand those, the programming in part, because it's something that, we certainly, I think as they spoke to it, their service delivery is with culture, community-based organizations whose core focus is keeping folks, both safe and healthy in their households, Community Energy Project, African American Alliance for Home Ownership, and others as part of their service delivery partners. So I hear you, and it's a valid point.
Yeah, just a quick response to that is that, I would love to have a dialogue too, but, unfortunately, we don't have the ability to do so. So, yeah.
Megan?
Yeah, and just kind of I've been thinking about that one a lot too. And, it's kind of been covered, but the things I like about it are that it is directly about our priority populations, which some of the projects are less that. And I do see a nexus between climate and water work. I think that and so, I'm generally like, I get it. And it's a small amount of money, like Robin said, in the grand scheme. Although I don't think our community-based orgs will think that's that small, because that's a lot more than a lot of them get. So, and I also wonder if we're saying we can fund city waterworks, are we opening future community responsive grants to that kind of project? It's an interesting thing that this is an area of funding we haven't done before. So I'm generally supportive for reasons I said, and I have some mild hesitations for those reasons.
It's all valid points. Our water conservation work generally focuses on hot water use. That is where our water conservation work in our urban program focuses on. So it is, I want to just both acknowledge the points there and speak to more the fact that I think here you're speaking more to the equity outcomes. I mean, their target audiences that they serve here are households that are earning 60% median family income or lower. So it is a both a narrowly targeted program in terms of the benefits, but and I think that's always the trade-offs with the benefits versus the community, I would say community benefits in the forms that it takes, and the climate benefits. Okay. Keep us moving here, folks. Okay, now we get to the fun one, our Bureau of Hydroelectric project, and so our power. Apologies. And so this is the asset within our city that generates renewable power, powering 8,000 to 10,000 homes per year. And so this is critical city infrastructure, and it is critical to our regional power supply and part of our path to getting to clean energy or net zero power supply. As part of this facility, has been around for some time and is going through and is at that stage in its life where it's got to have some major upgrades to it, upgrades to both critical electrical components, and then going through a lengthy federal Energy Regulatory Commission relicensing process. That is part of ultimately keeping the system continuing to produce that power and function, as folks have noted. The underlying economics of this hydroelectric power is that it has been more challenged in recent years for a range of reasons that are beyond me. But at core to that, this is a project that does produce clean power, and it is critical for our regional power mix. And currently, it is PGE is the purchaser of that power, and so I will leave it there and chime in and turn it to James, but wanted to just acknowledge that. And here, just lastly, also for folks that maybe just be chiming in, that based on the conversations, based on the fact that we think there is a broader conversation on reserve funds and how do we approach them, in the conversations that have been had here, the Water Bureau did withdraw the reserve fund from this. So it's the proposal is for items 4 and 5 here on the slide.
Hello, this is Paul. Can you all hear me?
Yes, Paul.
Hi, Paul. I didn't know who BPL is. That's what you're coming across online.
Okay. Yeah, my first name is Baptist. So Baptist Paul. Anyway, This is Paul Lumley, a community member or committee member, and thank you for allowing me to make a few remarks. I've been giving this project a lot of thought. Well, first of all, I'm glad that the reserve fund proposal was withdrawn, but the project itself really isn't eligible because it's not in the city of Portland. We certainly wouldn't fund anything in Gresham, yet this project is probably 25 miles the other side of Gresham. So it's a long ways from Portland. And if the city did fund this project, it could set an interesting precedent for us to spend PCEF funding outside of the city, which I don't think we've ever done before or would even recommend to do. So for that basis alone, the remaining two projects should not be funded. I've heard from folks that this is in line with the values of PCEF and especially for clean water and clean energy. That might be true, but with or without the PCEF funding, we're still going to get the same water. We're still going to get the same small amount of electricity produced for the electrical grid. So really it comes down to whether or not this is a good use of our funding. So I would also like to bring up that I have been involved in several FERC relicensing projects when I was at the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. And I'm very aware that the tribes most likely are going to assert some kind of interest, the rights to cultural and natural resources. And I'm glad to see that there was some text that they intend to pursue tribal consultation, but my experience with all other FERC relicensing projects is that the tribes will assert a claim and then the owner of the project will defend itself from it. So if for some reason the city decides to go ahead and fund this ineligible project, I would request that the city not allow any of these funds to be used to challenge tribal rights. So I just don't think that this kind of use of funding is in line with the values of PCEF in that regard. Thank you.
But first, I just want to say thank you, Paul, and I think that that's worthwhile consideration how we, as the committee responds to that. And I'll just answer a quick response to one piece because we did immediately check in with the city attorney's office. It is an interesting case because you're absolutely right. Our physical improvements, we've been clear, have to fall within the city of Portland, and we did go back to our code and go back to, and it's this the way that this. From a technicality, it is an eligible project in part just the way the city is defined. The city means in the city code at large is the city of Portland, Oregon, or the area within the, and I want to acknowledge first that I'm reading you city code, so I want to acknowledge that does not necessarily align with boundaries because it's a challenging thing when we talk about boundaries, given that these are human-made constructs here. In settler constructs. So city means the city of Portland, Oregon, or the area within the territorial city limits of the city of Portland, Oregon, or such territory outside the city over which the city has jurisdiction or control by virtue of ownership or any constitutional or charter provisions. So we did go through the city attorneys, and because that it is on city property in that sense, it is eligible to be invested in, but I'm just going to say that and I'm going to stop talking.
Well, thank you for the definition. I'm still a hard no on this project for a number of reasons, but thank you for hearing me out.
Faith and Megan, I saw that you, Maria, I'll call on you. And Faith and Megan, I did see your hands up. So if you would like to comment, please raise your hand again. Maria?
Thank you. Following Paul's comments and what Sam had just clarified, Sam, will you confirm that this City Bureau BPS has already kind of vetted every single project in terms of eligibility, legality, and alignment with PCEF code as we have it?
Correct, Maria, we have. And I think there is an element of this that beyond this, we will need to be developing our interagency agreements, which I think is a place where it's worthwhile to potentially bring those back to you all to look at just some of the measures and outcomes, because there's there's a certain amount of this which ultimately comes down to the details, and it gets down to the level of details around exactly how we prescribe use of funds into some of these projects. So at this level, yes, these are all eligible, but there will be another exercise following this, assuming it gets through council, where we will be working on those interagency agreements where we spell out the next level of details, which is where we continue to make sure that, you know, the specific use of funds are all eligible. And so, you know, I know that there's, I mean, I think, Paul, you made a suggestion there that, and I think there's other things that we can certainly include as part of terms of, you know, terms of use of funds, but I'll turn it back to you all.
Megan?
Yeah, the one reason I've had my hand up, Paul and Sam kind of addressed, so I feel like it's been mostly answered, but when I began thinking about its location and realized it wasn't in Portland, I did have that question because it has come up a lot for regenerative agriculture projects in the past. There's a lot of rationale why farmers might want farm not in the city of Portland to serve Portland farmers, or for Portland farmers to go there, and they've been told nothing outside of the city. And so I get that this is city-owned property, so it's different. But it does make me wonder if, like, okay, the city probably owns other things outside the city, and like, could community orgs use those? Like, you know, just always thinking about precedent, and are we following the same guidelines we set? And so, you know, I sort of see this rationale. Now, as for the other issues Paul raised, I don't, it's sort of a new thing for me on this relicensing. So that's an interesting, I'm sort of sitting with that.
It is, Megan, we learn everything. We learn something new every day. So one, I will say that, you know, even recently knowing the city owns a golf course in Washington County is, you know, and I think I've known that, but so I think it's something we haven't discussed. And I know it is a conversation that I know our staff, David Granfield and others, have brought up several times around city land and land access. And so that's something we can certainly turn back and explore to what extent there is city-owned land outside of Portland and tease out where there is room for that conversation. But, you know, on the top of my head here, I don't know. It was sort of teasing out the answer for this particular question.
Sam, did you have additional comments?
No, not yet.
All right, Faith?
I lowered my hand before because I thought that Paul's comments were quite convincing and made mine unnecessary, but I realized that it probably has applicability to the other projects as well. So what if, can we make suggestions on improvements to funding allocations, such as can this energy be allocated to low-income citizens in Portland? You know, I understand that PGE from you, Sam, is purchasing this power. Is there any additional funds that could be allocated so that those are actually directed to low-income individuals and lower their overall energy costs? I'm not sure that I want to make that proposal for this because I'm not sure that it should move forward, but it is a question I have if those level of details, for example, additional proposals would need to be all articulated and agreed on tonight, or could we say that we approve, for example, a slate of these programs with the understanding that requirements are worked out in that interagency agreement?
I think, and I'm going to turn to James, but before I do turn to James, I think that the initial request, I think it's complicated. So I think we would absolutely need to circle back, and I'll let James chime in briefly. And then I think but I do think beyond that, in terms of just generally like requirements, and I think Paul even potentially mentioned there as requirements around conditions of how they approach this, I think that you can add to the funding. And I think if what we would have to do is if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. And that means they don't, you know, we either come back to the table to you all, or so I think that the place here is you can stipulate those requirements, and our job is to follow up and figure out, does that work or not? And if it doesn't, we come back to you all without, you know, and so I think, you know, but I just want to acknowledge what I perceive as what the initial ask was, fairly complex, and I'll just let James briefly chime in. And I'll encourage maybe that we potentially, to the extent that there's more conversation here, we consider maybe parking this one and coming back to this and seeing how the others, where folks are landing on some of the others.
No, thanks, Sam, and thanks, Faith, for the question. And I'm not attempting really to fully speak on behalf of the Hydroelectric Power Bureau in this capacity, but I just want to like state a few things that I think are known. And Sam kind of said it, that we can attach requirements to the expenditure of our funds. However, the power sales of the existing contract with PGE are determined by a contract that was signed in 2022 and has a 10-year life. And so I think it's very unlikely, just to kind of state potentials, that we could reopen that contract in the near term. The relicensing of this facility, if it were to move forward, would be for 40 years, with multiple other power contracts, coming after that from the year 2032 and beyond. So, I think there's a discussion that we certainly can have, but likely not. It's not going to be a near-term discussion about amending the power sales contract. So yeah, just wanted to share that.
Yeah, nor do we have any control over that current contract or the parties of that contract. So that makes sense. Thank you.
Sam, we were scheduled for a break at 4 o'clock. It's 4:02. Would you like to break at this point for 5 minutes?
Sure. Let's. I mean, I'm looking at Megan and Ramfis. Is that okay with you? I think I'm going to say sure, because I'm trying to think if that would be better after another session. But let's take the break now.
All right, we'll come back at 4:07, everyone.
Okay. Tracy, I just wanted to acknowledge that Faith is going to join us via phone.
And yes, and I just let her enter the waiting room, Sam.
You got it before me.
And Paul also joined. Hi, Paul.
Hello, everybody. I think I was about 40 minutes late for the first part, so I apologize for that, but I was giving a legislative tour, so. But it's good to see you all.
Good to see you too. Hope the tour went well.
Hey, Paul.
Hello.
Okay. Let's go ahead and
Michael's
move
joining us from some forest.
You are all very in appropriate places. Okay, maybe not appropriate for the fact that you shouldn't be in this meeting, and I apologize for that. Okay, I'm just getting my notes up. Okay. All right.
Are we live yet?
I think we are.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Yes,
all
we
right.
are, Paul.
The next set of projects are projects within the Bureau of Environmental Services. And so this is our bureau that is focused on managing many of our natural areas, our green infrastructure, and our wastewater systems. And so there's really three large buckets of programming here that's focused on one, watershed, natural areas, natural systems, restoration, biological sciences, our stormwater management, our blue-green infrastructure and revegetation work, which is about maintaining that. And then the work that happens in planting private property trees, which is in contrast to our work with the Portland Parks and Recreation, which is focused on public property trees, that right-of-way trees, and some private property trees. And so I know you all saw, I hope you all saw, it was late, but some of the responses here from the Water Bureau. But I think, in many regards here, these projects are also, certainly there is, I think what they spoke to in a lot of their analysis is the emissions reduction calculations are challenging because these are biological systems that we're talking about. In some ways, our Water Bureau projects may be easier given those are mechanical systems, but these are these have another layer of challenge, which is not just the households and the way the households systems function, but this is about our natural ecological functioning systems. And so they provided general ranges, but I would argue here similar is that in the spectrum of emissions reductions, they're going to be lower here, certainly lower, but they are part of our natural systems that provide a lot of the other co-benefits associated with green infrastructure. Now, they also spoke to and gave some examples of their partnerships that they've built with community-based organizations as part of some of their service delivery and work with community partners, ranging from groups like Wisdom of the Elders, Wild Habitat Contracting, others, to and as part of the range of their work. And so as well as some community-based organizations like Verde, Blueprint Foundation, and a handful of others. They also, at a large level, just spoke to some of their prior work and experience, some of which Ramfis had called attention to around their community benefits agreements that they had developed as part of earlier work they had done a little while ago in deploying some significant resources. So I think that, I'm not going to be able to summarize all that information. I just wanted to capture and acknowledge the different pieces of information, but also acknowledge here that a lot of their work, while there are emission sequestration here that is, maintained and enhanced as part of their work, it is overall going to be less than other investments. And I'd probably say substantially less, and yet that's the balance that we're always talking. I'll stop there and turn it to committee members, see if you all want to share other reflections, concerns that are coming up here.
Sam, I don't see any hands.
Moving on.
Oh, Paul.
Thank you. I have not had a chance to read these before the meeting because they just came in, but I scanned it really quickly and I didn't see a response to one of the questions we had about the private property trees and how they'd be prioritized. It might be in there. Did they answer our question about whether or not these resources will be directed towards the priority communities that we work with?
My understanding, Paul, and apologies, this has been how do we bring all this together? My understanding is yes, and this is an area where I would say, in many ways, I'd in fact encourage probably further committee conversation, or even if you'd like to stipulate that committee involvement in here. In part, what I've heard here and what has been relayed is in terms of the where and the sort of partnership approaches. Bureau of Environmental Services is entirely open to any of the committee's suggestions, or not even suggestions, any committee's directives in terms of how they do that work. So, I think to me that was a yes, but also, I think we'll speak to PBOT later on, where PBOT explicitly mentions their equity matrix that they use as approach for how they deploy their additional streetlights and so forth. BS didn't necessarily have an equity matrix tool, and so I think I think it's to your discretion around how you all want to be either explicit about that or to what extent you want to follow up on that.
Ramphis?
Sorry, caught me eating an apple. Just a clarification, Sam. For all these items that we're looking at, we will receive reported data, especially as it relates to our dashboard when it comes to community served, priority populations, workforce, like that will still be, we will still be receiving those reports year in, year out as we're updating our dashboard for piece of money invested. Is that correct?
Correct, Ramphis. I think the work that does need to happen, and I think this is where we're happy to your workshop here, the language is, we need to have a conversation marrying and integrating sort of what the exercise we've been going through as staff is RFP1, RFP2, the climate investment plan, and now this. And so we've got to be able to marry what each of those are and what rolls up and how it rolls up. And when we capture a benefit as a community, a priority population being served, especially when we talk about some of these more geographic based investments that may not be at a household, but at an area. So I think the answer is firmly yes. I think maybe my call to you all is I think there's a space here to request that dialogue or that around those measures and metrics with you all to make sense of it together. So because it's a body of work.
Thank you. And then just to your last point, and I'll kick it over to Megan, but then to your last point, sounds like in addition to what's in the legislation, we have the under code, we still get to finalize the workforce and contract agreement. So as we've talked about with all these pieces, at least from my vantage point, still seems like there's the potential for a symbiosis when it comes to workforce and contracting opportunities from what we funded to what we're seeing here. Seems like, it seems like the potential for us to set additional parameters, say hey, formalizing or continuing to formalize the symbiosis from workforce and contract opportunities from our initial PCEF funds to be part of the pipelines for some of these projects. I could potentially begin to see the connecting tissue here, but we would still have the opportunity, whether it's through maybe the intergovernmental agreement, but at least at the very least within the workforce contract agreement. So just want to get that just to start connecting some of these dots.
Yeah, and maybe we might just include, and I'm saying this to James so we can think about it before we get there, just include language around explicitly coming back to you all prior to executing the intergovernment or interagency agreements with these bureaus so that we can walk that through with you all, because that's correct. as you all saw in some of the responses, these bureaus each have different workforce and contractor equity approaches based on the work, the kind of projects they've done, and the individuals there and the relationships they've cultivated. And so I think that's a place where we're not going to be able to do it justice here. But I think what I hope you all saw from the responses is that there is a commitment there. It's just that's something we can bring back to you all prior to executing the interagency agreements. And I think I would probably, frankly, just capture that as part of this.
Faith?
Yeah, I think that's in Ranfis, the way in which you framed the question is probably better than the way in which I framed it in the last go around. And Sam, I didn't quite understand your answer last time. And so this is getting a little closer. I think there's a lot of details in all of these, and specifically requirements that we might want to, or targets that we might want to reach with respect to all of these performance goals, that I can't imagine that this committee, based on the language that we've received or the information that we have to date, could come up with really thoughtful parameters that we could do that all in the interagency agreements. And so that's my question. Can we say there's going to be mutually agreeable yes, we approve, but you have to enter into a mutually agreeable interagency agreement that has performance requirements that we're going to revisit. It's going to be a condition or a gate on future funding, like even annual allocation. So I just added a new component. Sorry about that. Let me go walk back and just say, can we say that we're going to put parameters in an interagency agreement that's going to be mutually approved by staff and by PCEF staff and the agency?
Yes, you can, and that's not too dissimilar from what we've already done. All of our interagency agreements have essentially annual check-ins where if they're not hitting their performance measures, they can't move ahead with proposing their following year's budget. So that's not far from what we've done. I think the key is going to be what are those measures that fit at that level. And in some of this programming, it's going to be clear. There's going to be, there's a runway that they've worked with and they will have an understanding, and we can work with that understanding to make it better. In some of these, and I think the tree maintenance program is a good example where we're going to learn. And so I think that the simple answer is absolutely. The more complex one is it's just going to vary. The degree and detail we're able to get to in these interagency agreements is going to vary, but absolutely. And
can I throw out one other suggestion?
please. And I know James is tracking because I'm going to be probably looking in a little bit to see if we can master some language here for you all to consider, hearing where this is going.
One additional consideration we might add, or one level we might add to this, is a subcommittee of PCEF that looks at city projects on an annual basis, and so that it's not just all on staff, and that we can involve both the committee and community potentially to look at progress and assess performance on an annual basis, so that it's not just so that we can get eyes on it from the community perspective in the public space.
We've captured that. And James, I'm just noting I sent a shared document your way, so we can we can be drafting this right now and put it up on the screen in a little bit.
Paul?
Thank you. I actually was, while we were talking, I went through their responses and got to the last page, and they have a really nice table about how they are going to be working with priority PCEF populations and contractor categories. I really like the layout there, but noting with some disappointment that when it came to the trees, it was blank when they identified the PCEF priority population, but the rest of the table looks pretty nice, and we might want to look at that and use that format as a way to rank all the other Bureau projects. Thank you.
Robin?
Paul, I just want to comment in the table that was passed out last week, or I don't know, whenever, the summary table. There is a statement in there that says that the East Portland renters and property owners will be prioritized.
Well, that's good to know. Thank you.
Back to you, Sam.
Okay. I'm going to keep moving. And at the same time, just know that we are working on language just based on what we're hearing here. Next up is the Portland Housing Bureau. And this is, we've dabbled in this a little bit. So we have some understanding of the measures and the work here, but it's largely focused on 4 years of funding for clean energy investments into rehabilitation and preservation of low-income multi-family housing. And so this is where Portland Housing Bureau, as part of putting out its critical repair dollars to support funding existing affordable housing that is either about to lose its affordability requirements or has other sort of critical life stage needs. And so they would use their critical repair dollars to bring those projects in and also pair PCEF resources to target specifically the energy efficiency investment. As part of that, be able to target more units and go deeper as part of these investments. I think the only last thing I would add is in that it does extend the affordability. I think a large majority of their target here is between the 30 to 60% area median income, and certainly some that are below 30%. So I'll leave it there. I think that's all I have to share here. Any questions? And maybe in the response, actually, as I'm saying that, Tracy, I realize I have some more responses. The only response, I think, I think what you saw in their responses here, certainly PHB spoke to more of their processes, their accountability processes through the project implementation phase, where there's a range of folks, underwriters, others that are involved in evaluating projects and ensuring they're moving through appropriate stage gates as part of the work that's happening. So that's a lot of what they spoke to from an accountability perspective. And then they certainly shared some of their workforce contractor equity criteria that they apply to the projects in their cohort. And I think the last thing is they spoke to some of the their existing projects and the fact that I think they said somewhere near 73% are subject to Davis-Bacon or prevailing wage rates. So this is another area, and so it is going to be different. So I think there's room for continued conversation. But Ramfis, in direct response to your questions about direct pay, I think what we gathered here is that they're interested in facilitating their partners leveraging direct pay as part of their projects, but it's something where I think, as you'll see with many entities, they're going to need guidance and assistance to navigate direct pay, which is part of the Inflation Reduction Act. So I think those are the last.
I don't see that any committee members have comments.
Okay. Moving to OMF. And so there's really two buckets and different parts of Office of Management and Finance here that we're speaking to. The first of which was City Fleet. This is an internally facing bureau. A lot of their responses spoke to their work with existing contractors that install their charging infrastructure and relationships we have, or partnerships we have with minority business enterprises to do that charging infrastructure, and then some of the work that they do with other trades to get some of the infrastructure to the charging station. So a lot of line work to get the electrical lines and equipment to there. They did acknowledge that some of their work in exploring training programs and building out training programs as part of transitioning their workforce into working on more electric vehicles, as well as other low carbon or zero carbon solutions and infrastructure. So I'm sure there's more I'm missing there, but I'll stop there and just move to the Arlene Schnitzer. Here, similarly, some of the response just gave more nuance into the total project cost, the roof replacement, some of the targets in terms of the higher efficiency insulation as part of the roof replacement, and then the higher efficiency cooling tower. The cooling tower overall will use about half the energy of the prior cooling tower. And this overall, while it is targeted at the Arlene Schnitzer is managed by the Portland 5, which manages the 5 performing arts venues. And this just improves their ability as part of the Portland 5, their ability to offer other services and programming, particularly some of their community education programming, which is focused on Title I schools and other schools and getting youth out to experience and benefit from their programming.
Megan?
Yeah, first I'll just comment that, my initial reaction to these were like, well, I see the climate impacts and not so much the community benefit one, but Randface at our last meeting really made a case for particularly the fleet related positive environmental justice benefits that, in the multiplier effects. And the Arlene Schnitzer one, I'm hearing your case. It's probably not the strongest one out there, but I get it. And I do think the climate impacts. I think a broader question I have for all these city transfers, I appreciated Faith and Paul bringing up, I think it was those two bringing up the reporting measures. I also have a question about how we pay these city agencies. Is it like, alongside that, are we paying them 1/5 of the money at a time? And then when they hear how their progress is going, we get an update. I'm curious, particularly the fleet one brings this to mind because they do identify a fair number of challenges. So it's not specific to this proposal, although it is one that I wanted to comment on it anyway. But because, we nonprofits, we see their annual reports and then quarterly reports and then give them more money. And we have that kind of clawback or stopping mechanism. So what is that going to look like for agencies?
This aside there, that's a big one. And we've been having those conversations with the city budget office around how do we manage across, and the cannabis fund is kind of an interesting, and there's a similar function where the cannabis fund at the city funds a lot of different portions of the city. So we're very much in active conversations with the city around how are we tracking these and how are we setting up sub-funds, interagents. There's different ways in which you structure this and which ways we have line of sight into when the money is in their accounts versus how they're spending it, whether they're spending it on personnel, equipment. So the short answer, Megan, is that's very much something live that we're teasing out. And I think that we're trying to figure that out at a structural level with our city budget office around how we set this up. The next would be at that project level, once you figure out the structural level, and that comes down to what is the flow of expenditures look like? Is the expectation that it's a lot of staff time and it's a steady expenditure and we're looking at just personnel time that's being billed to our programming versus is it equipment and we're seeing sort of chunks being spent? So I think I'd have to follow back up with you. That is very much we're in that conversation, some of which we're in with, we've already gone through with Housing Bureau and we're actively going through that with Portland Bureau of Transportation, but it's going to look a little differently for each of these. I think the main thing that we will be looking to, and I think it comes back to the measures is, and we've been clear with budget offices, each year we will budget, but we will not allocate any resources for the following year until we've got our measures and understand where things are at for that given year. So there is stage gates in between years. So it's not just 5 years go deliver and there's no checkpoints. Like every year we will have that reporting back, and through the budget process is the process that sort of is that stop point of are we continuing or are we not in a given year, and that's and we will retain that control. But the sort of specific disbursements and whatnot, we haven't gotten there yet, and it's something we're actively thinking through.
Yeah, in light of that, as we get to making some sort of decision here, it feels like all of our decisions are going to be preliminary recommendation pending seeing all these details, like a lot of the devil's in the details here. And it's because of the rushed first process.
And in defense, I will also just acknowledge that there's, it took us another, in some of these instances, it still takes us 3-4 months after there's an agreement on something to do. So there's always a level of detail that our interagency agreements tease out. And they look different. There's no one standard format. So it's, even if we were able to do a better process and get you more details, there would still be a subsequent level of detailing that we would do in the agency.
Yeah, and I get that as somebody who has an IGA with the city.
Yeah. All right, the big one, PBOT. So here, going through the 5 projects, just to call them out, with streetcar replacement, active transportation operations, small active transportation capital investments, community programming, education encouragement, and LED streetlights. I think overall the responses that the Bureau of Transportation provided, there's a longer set of responses, but at a high level, I think there's they spoke to certainly the benefit that the streetcar and the community streetcar serves, and the fact that this funding allows it to continue operating the streetcar with a fleet with a fleet at the same level that it has, as opposed to slowly pulling some of the fleet out and undermining those operations and the communities that are served there. So I think that was the response. more broadly, I think there's an openness to a conversation there around some of the desires for whether there's room for, room for adjustments within the streetcar. The transportation, and then with some of these others, I think what PBOT responded to is just gave a sense for some of the metrics that they would consider that we would subsequently work on, that they're already working on. And I think the last piece as it relates directly to these projects is the LED streetlights, and the questions there we heard from you all is, what is this? It is about continuing the existing replacement of streetlights and bulbs, but it is also about installing new streetlights in some areas as well. And they spoke to using their equity matrix in particular for driving that. And I think that's their underlying approach and how they approach equity. And they acknowledge that that's the way they view all of their projects through. There is a portion of this which is about adding additional streetlights to areas where there isn't sufficient lighting, and they do use their equity matrix to do that. And then last, a lot of their response spoke to what I think is within the city, a lot of leadership in equitable contracting, and the leadership that they've taken to doing more equity in their contracting and building out additional new, prime contractors that are minority business enterprises, as well as subcontractors. And so they spoke that at a high level on their commitments and their expertise and leadership in that space.
Robin?
Yeah, I want to talk about the streetcar response. Last week or whenever, at some point when we met, I asked the question about, if PCEF is going to pay for the streetcar replacement, that's going to relieve them of a capital burden, and kind of what benefits could be, offered back to the community. And I had a different take than you, Sam, on their response. They simply said it will allow them to, continue the service. The way I read it is that, if PCEF does not provide the funding, that they would shut down the service. I interpreted it as almost like a hostage situation. I was just disappointed in that, response. And especially since, streetcars, I don't know when streetcars were introduced, but it was at least 20 years ago, 15, whatever. It's a long time. They should have known that this day when the streetcars start breaking down that need to be pulled, they knew this 20 years ago when they planned this service. And to not have planned for this funding 20 years ago and built up a reserve, built up funding to anticipate this day, is just quite frankly financially irresponsible. So, I'm not a transportation expert, but I'm just kind of offering my comments, based upon what they submitted, and I'm just disappointed at their response.
Megan?
I'm commenting on the streetlights project because that was one I was curious about. They did not have any equity information the first time, and we've asked that of tree planting and other ones. So I was just curious to know, and they sort of answered the question. I mean, they both said it was a citywide project, which I understand, like as a city infrastructure, it's logical to move through the city. And at PCEF, we value projects that serve certain communities, and people brought up really good points of high crash corridors and walking while black, those sorts of things last time, and they sort of half answered it. So I would put this one, where they sort of said, we're doing a citywide program and we consider an equity matrix. So I don't really know what to make of the mixed answer there. But I think this goes to the whole metrics and reporting part, and being clear to them, like there may be a rationale for a citywide program, and if it's benefiting all communities, I can understand the PCEF implications, but just some more clarity there, and particularly in the reporting, how they're doing that.
Yeah, I think duly noted. And then Robin, just to follow up, I mean, one, I will just in defense of our, the colleagues, I know that this was one that came in a little later, in part because there's a lot going on right now. And so I don't know that I know that our staff data staff did not have that much. I mean, they were working on this yesterday evening, did not have as much time to respond. So it's not so, but it's just, and then I think I'll offer and just step back. I mean, the entirety of this, and this is the challenge, is that for as progressive as a city we've been in our climate work, when push comes to shove, climate work gets pushed to the side. I think this is a unique opportunity collectively to force that climate work to not be pushed to the side, because then it's the case, whether we're talking about Bureau of Environmental Services or others, that you heard it in their presentations last week. In the end of the day, when these challenges come, they focus on their core, sort of the core thing that they have to do. And while there's staff that are committed to this work, these are the places, and sad but true, that take those hits. And that is because our form of government is a challenge. It has not necessarily provided us that long-term thinking, because as you've noted many times, none of this is entirely new. It may have happened faster. I think collectively there's state data that the shift to electric vehicles has happened a lot faster than many of us projected. And that means that these funds are taking a hit quicker than they projected, but we knew it was happening. And yet the conversation around sustainable funding for a transportation system is still, whether at the city level or at the state level, is still far behind of where it needs to be. So I'm both just, you're entirely right, Robin, and whether it is the political nature of, folks wanting to often create new programming, oftentimes without necessarily the funding being there and driven by that. Whereas I do think as we shift to a new form of government, it will bring that stability, and that we're no longer necessarily run by commissioners that may want to have splashes in different places without necessarily tending to the stuff that's not as sexy, which is the deferred maintenance. And so it's just I'm speaking to more the reality of what it is and my hope in terms of a new form of government. But your points are valid. I mean, that's entirely right.
Paul?
Well, thank you. I'm not going to speak in opposition to any of these proposals from transportation. But I do want to follow up on something that Megan said about the vagueness of what they intend to do with these funds and how they may or may not fit very well with PCEF values. It makes me want to have some caution here about agreeing to 5 years of funding. If we're being pushed to agree to something so quickly and there's so much vagueness, it really speaks to the need to fund in much smaller increments, 1 year or 2 year, until we can get more information. Now, I'm not saying that these wouldn't continue to be funded, but until we get more information, I don't see how we could recommend so much funding for such a long period of time without not having all the information. Thank you. And actually, and this goes across all of the proposals.
Maria?
I'd like to say, just as somebody who benefits greatly from all of the things on this page, whether it's the streetcar or the programming that PBOT puts out or streetlights, I think it's always really frustrating to see that these are the types of programs that are in danger of being cut in our regular everyday transportation system, and that the fate of some of these could depend on decisions that we make here. I think that's really frustrating, and it makes this decision tough. I also like to say that I could see why PBOT proposed this combination of programs and projects, because these are the best candidates for PCEF among all the other things that they do every day and provide for us in Portland. But I'd like to, like Robin had said, I'd like to know the plans in the future as we plan for our transportation system, that we understand how much this would cost later on down the line when things break down, when things have to be replaced, that we could find more sustainable cycles of funding. And I think the city is doing that right now with the things they're proposing for taxpayers and whatnot. So just expressing that these are all important to me. I also know it's just frustrating to always see active transportation on many chopping blocks as someone who is an active transportation planner and professional. So these resonate with me deeply.
Faith?
Thanks for that, Maria. That's really helpful to have your expert opinion on that as well. I wanted to respond back to Paul and ask you a question, Paul. Does the idea of having performance gates along the way that are subject to this interagency agreement that sets forth performance targets?
Faith, excuse me for interrupting, but you're cutting out.
Right here.
Faith, can you repeat what you said? You're cutting out.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Can you hear me right now?
Yes.
Okay. I just wonder, Paul, if the idea of having performance gates and performance reviews annually to find out if
I think we lost Faith.
I think we lost Faith. Ramphis, why don't you go ahead, please, and hopefully Faith will come back on.
Well, I think she was getting the question I was actually going to ask on this as well. Paul, I don't know if you got most of that. I could try to gather again what I felt like she was getting to my question, which was
Go ahead. Yeah, I think I understood what your question was, but go ahead, Ramphis.
yeah, like I guess, yeah, like, you know, given our past conversation earlier, the previous slides about, you know, having intergovernmental agreement with reporting built in, we'll get progress reports, whether we could bake something in around just, you know, whether the money is intending to be spent, what it is, if there needs to be wiggle room to reevaluate. I'm probably not capturing how Faith would have asked the question, but yeah, I don't know if you had a response there.
If we could get that kind of detail in advance before money transfers or programs initiate, I think that would be great. And I wonder how different this might be if we were doing an RFP process with the community, where they respond with a proposal and then eventually a contract comes with more detail. I'm viewing it something like that, although actually all these proposals are so vague and so simplified compared to what the community would apply in their grants. But I view this as like the second step would be a lot more detail. But then the question becomes, who decides if one of these programs veers off the PCEF intended target? And who gets to rein in a project if it's already been approved for funding for 5 years? And I don't know how that would work with the city government in charge of how these programs are implemented, but maybe it's a fundamental question, a foundational question for us, because I don't think this is going to go away. We learned at the last meeting that funding isn't going to, most likely not going to drop off after 5 years. So we're going to have to wrap our arms around this one way or the other.
I think, Paul, you're correct that we're going to have to wrap our arms around this one way or the other. And I think we're taking notes, and I want to move on, but I think we're taking notes, and I think I have a few ideas, because one, I think what we're hearing is coming back before you all with the interagency agreements to review those with you all. Then secondly, on that annual touch point, I think there's a place there in the same way that we've talked about other work groups. You know, we will have whether it's CIFA on our call here, another staff member, James, or others. We will have folks working with our colleagues at PBOT each year, and through the year, but each year at that touch point before part of the budget process. And I think that's a place where we can have Maria as a transportation person be working as part of that group with staff as a liaison to reviewing that interagency agreement, those outcomes. I think it's always just how do we sync this up with both the committee's cadence and the cadence that we meet with, which is just going to be more frequently. And so I think there's a way to do it there, and want to keep us moving. And I'm going to kind of in the background work with James and seeing whether we can include that language. We've got just 2 more here, and then we can roll back. We've got Portland Parks and Recreation here, and there's a diversity of programs here, but we're starting with the Mount Scott Community Center renovation. It's part of a broader renovation. So a lot of the response you saw there was their broader approach to the renovation itself, and some of the other contracting and how they, some of the attributes they expect to include as part of this project, but also just their approach they're taking to working during contracting for this work. You saw a little bit about and so there's a little more details there around just the process for accountability there around the project and who's involved. Then there is on the tree protection and care, there is a lot of, we need to figure this out together. And this is a particular program where I will just name that this program does need a 5-year commitment, in part because it is building an entirely, it is building out a new system, something that would work really well in parallel with our equitable tree canopy a tree canopy initiative, and is something that community has consistently asked for. So this is one that, you know, certainly review and that equitable tree canopy work group is where we anticipate that review happening. So I want to just acknowledge there is a body that has been an active conversation on how can we fit this within their scope. But it is a program that the 5-year commitment is critical. So, and then the last really where they spoke to it was just the transition from gas-powered backpack leaf blowers, and just spoke to some of the work and the staffing that would need to happen there, and some of their aspirations for, you know, for purchasing that equipment itself, and doing so in a way that's more equitable.
Megan?
Yeah, a few questions, comments. You know, I see overall a nexus here. One question I have, you know, 100 million is a lot of money. And I think Robin and I were wondering earlier, and maybe Robin can reframe his own thoughts here, but, you know, in terms of guardrails and stuff, sizable projects of this amount. And I'm just curious about the staff and workforce implications of all this. I assume this would be a major hiring up. And that's a question that crosses all these projects is, do we have numbers on what's this? I know a lot of these are saving programs, but this one is a new program and it's ramping up. So questions about, is that PCEF staff? Is that like, how are we going to be able to manage all that? It's one, I don't understand why the apprentice program would only be 3 years in this mix. Like, why is it not an ongoing? I just, and I don't think they talk about that in the details. And then, you know, I wish the leaf blower program wasn't only limited to city. Like, I'm sure there's lots of our priority population folks who would like, and I know there are some community-based RFPs that have gone for that, but you know, it feels very limited to city staff. And it's, you know, it's a lot of money for Portland Parks and Rec. And they've got a levy and they've got other funding sources. So it's just, but I do see the nexus with the programs.
Robin?
Yeah, I'm going to chime on some concerns about the 100 million. You know, first I want to say I'm in favor of the tree protection and care program. Conceptually, I love it. But 100 million to a brand new initiative, that's a lot. We would never offer that to a nonprofit that says, oh, we're going to launch this new program, give us 5 years of funding, $100 million. That would never happen. It's just risky. You know, so I would prefer to see a more phased out, rolled out approach. You know, maybe start with one quadrant or one area of the city for, you know, $3 million the first year. And then every year, if we have these kind of funding gates, they get to scale up. But 100 million, that's a lot. I'm also concerned that this is so much money that, you know, after 5 years, you know, is the city realistically going to be able to fund this project on its own? No. And I think, you know, we're going to be in this situation where, you know, it probably won't be us or it won't be me. Going to have this question 5 years from now. And do we continue funding this program? And there's just going to be probably pressure to do so. So those are my concerns.
Yeah. One, I'll do my best in answering these, and I am looking at the time, and we're gonna likely need to go over. But let's see what we can do. It's Friday, and so one, this is going to be, there's a substantial component of this that is city staff, and it is urban forestry staff, at least as it stands now. The city reorg may change that, but it is urban forestry staff. That would be, and there will be a significant staffing up both on the staff side and importantly on the contractor side. And from all the experiences looking at other cities that have taken this sort of shift, this does take multiple years, and multiple years that latent contracting capacity and arborists and workforce doesn't just exist. So this is building this out. It is also staged, and it is also likely over $100 million once this ongoing program exists. It is going to be more than that. those are some of just the facts I will state, meaning that it's going to be over, it's not just $20 million a year. The next thing I would state is that Parks is continuously, they have staff that are continuously working on sustainable programming and looking at what does that look like, whether that's bonds or levies that are actively working on that, given that in Portland, our park system is beloved, and we spend more per capita than nearly most other cities on our park system, and yet they don't have permanent funding. Megan, as you noted, they have to go out for a levy every 5 years to support a third of their operations. And so this, the sustainable funding is a conversation that never ends, is my understanding. And I want to be careful about, but this is what it is, an end for them. And so it's both an important one, and it's both also just to acknowledge that you're absolutely right. When we get to really 3.5 years from now, when the conversation begins around the start of the next CIP, and in earnest looking at this work, you're going to have to look at each one of these programs, and you'll be at a fresh place to say, which ones do we continue? What are the trade-offs? What are ones that we should be considering and not? And that is the committee's prerogative. And, I suspect that this is going to remain up there. You're not wrong, Robin, and I think there is a chicken and egg here that legally within Title 11, the legal obligation still sits with the property owner. And at some point, whether the city ultimately actually moves that and changes that code is a question on funding. And so it's just to say that it is not a given. Yes, the conversation will come back, and yes, there will be pressure for continued funding for all the buckets. And that decision ultimately have to be made on, is there better investments to be made instead of this? Are there something else we should make in lieu of this? And so, but it isn't a given, is maybe all I just want to, we're talking about 5 years. So, and then I think here, the last thing I just would say is, given the scale and work and both economies of scale of building out and evaluating and, ultimately doing that work. And this is the thinking, I think, is very much a phased approach. I think that very much is the expectation here. That is my understanding. I think what is fair here is similarly is to get a better understanding when we build that out in the interagency agreement. And each year we would be reviewing and approving the work plan. So I think those same elements and attributes exist here, but it's, I think that's all I can say, but it is a big commitment, and we're going to have to keep close eye on this. And rest assured, I would acknowledge this is where we have more community eyes on us than anywhere else within the program, just in terms of external interest. When we've stepped back and look at where, and I think Megan can attest to this based on the work group she's been involved in, there's a tremendous amount of community interest here.
Paul?
Thank you. I saw in some of the written testimony, I think it was from Dean Marriott, about the gas conversion of gas to electric leaf blowers. And he was recommending that it not just be limited to city leaf blowers, but it would be something like a city program where we disconnected our downspouts, and some other examples, which sounds really interesting and intriguing. I don't know how you can limit it to only Portland residents, because leaf blowers can easily get up and walk across the boundary, but whereas downspouts cannot. So I thought it was interesting. I don't know how we would implement something like that, but I'd be open to that suggestion in the future.
Paul, it's a great one. I think that gets to that second. We won't get there today, just tracking the time, but that second allocation process, the city is actively is out for public comment on a leaf blower policy that phases out leaf blowers. And so you're correct in that there are other jurisdictions, other parts of the city even that would be interested in leaf, in institutions, whether that's our public school system, Portland Public Schools, others that would be looking at this. So your hunch is correct. We've got one more bureau. I'm going to just move there. The Bureau of Planning and Sustainability here. And so BPS, our home bureau, a lot of our work here fundamentally is based on creating new policies and programs that incentivize. It's oftentimes the carrot to the stick to our carrot. And maybe I want to be careful about the stick. It's a very gentle prodding stick that moves folks along. But this is works, the community-based renewable energy is work to create, as the city has one of the largest, land that has land entities. There's a lot of ongoing work to explore how can we make more city land, city building rooftops available for community-based renewable energy generation that's benefiting the community. And so largely focused on exploring those opportunities because there's a lot of incentives and policy directives and around creating more renewable community-based renewable energy generation locally. That's what that first focus is. That transportation decarbonization is continuing to implement our low carbon fuel standards and other decarbonization policies and programs. The eliminating carbon from buildings. This is a really important one, I would say, that has a strong nexus with an area of work where we've always seen a struggle, and this is creating building disclosure standards so that we can have both better information and data on the consumption of energy or the emissions profile of our building stock, so we can better target those with our incentive resources. Then the last is city operations decarbonization, some of which already exists in here, the Water Bureau and others, and OMF fleet, but there is tremendous amount of others. The city is a large institution that owns hundreds of buildings. There's large capacity to decarbonize the city. And so this would be supporting the other bureaus that might not have some of the capacity that OMF or Water Bureau have to have their in-house people that do this work. And so this would be us supporting that across city. So that's largely a lot of both policy and supportive work that creates the underpinnings for helping further decarbonize the city. Okay. All right. I'm gonna now, Tracy, I think maybe we should just check in with committee members and see both. I'm like trying to figure out what's the slide to sit on. Okay, can stop here for a second. I know we wanted to come back to the hydroelectric project, but want to see first if there are any general reflections before we come back. And I think we've got a little bit of language that I'm going to check in with James to see if we've got that we can share up with folks, but also to see if folks are willing to go for another, what I expect is probably 20 minutes. And I want to just check in. I know that some people will have hard stops, so I want to just kind of pause and see if maybe Ramfis, Megan, Tracy, if you all have any particular thoughts here.
I see Faith's hand up.
So do I. Faith?
Hopefully my internet will last long enough for this comment. Thank you all. If there are people that have hard stops, I would really love to hear a round robin of everyone, just how you're feeling and how you're doing. And it could be in response to a proposal, or it really just could be where you are at this moment. So offering that as a point of procedure.
Megan and Ramfis, any comments?
Yeah, I think if we could do, so I didn't see any committee members say I guess I'm assuming folks can stay a little longer because nobody indicated they couldn't. I see a few thumbs up and nods. So that's good news for continuing to dialogue. At 20 minutes is going to go by fast. I like Faith's idea a lot. So if we could go around and maybe try to keep ourselves to like a minute. And I think just be like, what are the like high level takeaways you have, or like hard things you have, or the idea was we would kind of green, yellow, red things, and I think we sort of did that without doing that like so clearly, but I think we surfaced what some of the more concerning questions are. So let's go around. I guess I'll start, and I feel like I've gotten to say a lot, but if we were to try to move towards a vote, I heard a lot of committee shared thoughts of like, well, I would want to know and see more about this in an IGA. I'd want there to be guardrails on it. So I feel like a vote would have to have like that sort of asterisk by it, which would be approve of the general concept, but with the knowledge that an IGA and guardrails around the spending would be part of that vote. I did hear a few folks really not into things. There were things I raised that are cross-cutting, like I want to hear more about workforce and internship stuff. And I've said over and over, while this is a discussion on city bureaus, today, I want to come back to like other two at a different time and raise the question of community-based and other kind of mechanisms, but to keep the focus on that. So I guess I could be okay with moving towards a tentative vote with like guardrails and IGAs and maybe redlining a few of the projects that some people saw as super problematic. You know, that's what I could see. I'll pass to Ramphis.
Just put me on the spot. I think no, I support just doing this exercise of going, getting a general sense from folks on this. I don't feel like in a rush, or that we need to make everyone feel in a rush to make a decision. But given the general direction of the conversation, I personally feel like there are opportunities here for many different intervention points that we could bake in through an IGA or through a workforce contractor agreement. And additionally, I think, I think the importance of getting progress reports, I think is a big get. I personally feel like we could have balanced more, or I would have wanted a desire from agencies to balance more from, other being a little bit more inclusive of community perspectives here. Even though it might not be outside of city's jurisdiction, but thinking of like paratransit, paralift transit for folks, even if it's TriMet's jurisdiction, like that would have been nice to have seen that in a combination of their various asks. But that's just me. With that said, though, I do see the synergies where we as a committee could leverage how we connect these projects with PCEF projects in terms of creating more formal workforce pipelines. So if there's an opportunity to explore that within the workforce and contractor agreement or through the IGAs, like I think it's worthwhile. I'll defer to folks where there are some, red line concerns. So I'll pause there and kick it back to whoever wants to chime in next.
I'll just go down the line based on the names I see. Faith, do you have comments to share?
I do. Thank you for your patience with my friend, my mute button. I wanted to just start with a couple of assumptions that I'm working under, or how I understand the reality of this moment. And one is, I guess it's just the way in which I view our task right now is I don't feel like I have an obligation to replace my judgment for the judgment of the work that has already been done. I might have some preferences and some opinions that I feel are somewhat contrary, but what I feel like my job is just to make sure that the conversation stays focused on PCEF's goals. And I think that we've done a real good job of that. And I know that that's everyone's intention, both here and in meeting, in coming up with a list of projects. So the other assumptions I have is that, and what we learned and what was really talked about last night or 2 days ago was that city bureaus have long had these climate project plans pursuant to the climate emergency plan. And many of those programs will not be funded, right? Like we talked about, it's so disappointing that those are the first to be cut. Because of the budget shortfall in the city. So there are good programs out there that will otherwise be cut. Again, not PCEF's problem, but it is the city will and the community members will suffer if that's true. Those that are chosen to be on this list had a particular nexus with PCEF priorities, and that's why they're here. PCEF staff and others have gone through those projects and pre-vetted them so that they met the two criteria of GHG reductions and community benefit. And I understand that community benefit is still, it applies in varying degrees as to whether we mean all Portlanders or particular PCEF priority populations. So there's a little bit of wiggle room there. I also heard, and this was not said super directly, but it came up and it stuck with me, and I believe it to be true, that PCEF staff doesn't have capacity to administer significant or much larger special programs under the CIP right now. Am I cutting out?
You were a little, but just keep going, Faith.
Okay. So I am concerned just about our capacity if we decided to go through another public process with these immediate funds and put that out in a grant process. And I also feel some urgency to get this money committed. I think there's a large, with a bucket of money sitting around in a environment of shortfall, there's an opportunity for these funds to be targeted without the PCEF priorities and without the PCEF opportunity to influence the way in which these programs are run, and particularly with our new governance model coming in, I'm concerned that if we don't allocate funds, we might not get a chance to. So with all of that, and with the idea of having performance, gates on an annual basis, and particular details that need to be agreed upon and signed off on by PCEF staff and potentially the committee in an interagency agreement. And also, I would also propose that we bring in and pay community members potentially to be part of a review committee on an annual basis, so that we can get a lot of public eyes on the hopeful, the great outcomes of these programs. I would be in favor of moving the slate forward. And I'll pass it to my next committee member.
Paul?
Did you call my name?
Oh, yes,
Okay.
Paul.
Well, I really appreciate Faith's comments and support them. And I've heard from other folks too about not needing to have a little bit more infrastructure of these as these projects move forward to implementation. Overall, we have a lot more money than we thought we had. And I don't think the CIP is shaped the way it needs to be, nor do I think the staff capacity is where it needs to be. And so we're going to have to right size this whole program here, because it sounds to me like it's going to be this way for quite a while. So I'm interested in pursuing that. But with regard to the projects at hand, I don't want to stand in the way of moving this forward, because I think the city is going to take these funds regardless. And so where we can assert our influence is probably the most important. So how we transmit the written material, the written agreement to the city is probably going to have a lot more value than a meeting like this. So at some point, we're going to need to look at something in writing. I don't know how fast that's going to happen between now and what is it, February 7th, when the city wants to have something from us. So there's not a lot of time. I wouldn't mind seeing something in writing that we could respond to. You've already heard my concerns about the hydroelectric project. I don't think that should be funded at all. But if it does move forward on that particular one, I just don't want to see any of those funds used to challenge tribal rights to cultural and natural resources. That just seems the opposite of what PCEF's about. But I think we have an opportunity here to help the city. I don't think we need to commit to 5 years of funding. I think it could be 2 years. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Robin?
Yeah, I'll first say is I agree too, in that I have reservations about 5 years. I prefer 2 years. I am willing to support 5 years with a robust set of enforceable IGAs that allow us to claw back, for lack of a better word, money if progress or criteria is not met, and after 2 years or after a year, whatever. And if a bureau is not able to spend the money, let's get it back. If they, if a bureau is going to hire 50 people, but they can only hire 25 people in year one, that unspent money I think that should come back, because they weren't able to spend that, and we can put it towards, however we decide to do with extra money, in the next meeting or two, we do that. So yeah, I think for me, just having strong IGAs is key. And I'm kind of looking down a list here, and yeah, I'll stop it. I'll pause there.
D'Angelo.
Sorry, you caught me just as I was kind of writing down some notes. I didn't quite get to knock everything out, but I guess for me, I got a chance to read through most of the responses to this to the committee for our questions, and I do appreciate the transparency and the amount of workforce opportunities. But like Megan and others have shared, I have concerns about the amount of money allocated to workforce development, the capacity in which that workforce development can even be maximized. I definitely support the thoughts behind the 2-year commitment. There are things that I have particular issues about or concerns. I think my most glaring concern is $100 million allocated to the trees in the city of Portland. Just because I've seen time and time again that when we see something like that happen, it usually affects, I guess, usually benefits more higher class populations. I don't think there was enough transparency about the private property owners that will benefit from these trees. And I also have seen plenty of time and time again where the trees have not been supported, and after a couple of years, they end up just dying because the funding runs out or nobody actually keeps up with it. Think that the best thing to do is, in order to allocate these funds, there needs to be measurable criterias and standards in those 2 years, like Robin said, to prove that these programs can be successful in both implementation and in the training and capacity building. And if they can prove to do so, then we'll continue to allocate funds. And if not, when that funding does come back, I do agree with that. But those are my thoughts.
Maria.
Thank you. Oh, I just got to take a deep breath. I feel like even if you give us another hour, this is not going to feel right. But I appreciate everybody for sticking around and being so committed to this. I think PCEF is so fortunate to be in this position, even if this process pushing urgency on us and the community is so frustrating. I know it's hard on staff too. This is just so familiar, and it shuts out the greater community from meaningfully participating in a decision this big, like they were able to do in the climate investment plan development in the last year. I know these proposals, in comparison to the distribution of funds across the diverse priority areas in the CIP, is like a little disappointing, and seeing how programs like regenerative agriculture or community responsive grants and climate jobs and workforce don't get this sizable bump. And I think at the end of the day, I want to support PCEF moving forward, helping the city moving forward, helping deliver some kind of relief so the city can deliver its programs. And I know the decisions won't stop here on how we vote today. I witnessed how PCEF and this committee's deliberations over the years have inspired even more curiosity about city spending and how decisions are made. So I feel like no matter what we decide in this room as well, we'll have other Portlanders continuing to participate in whatever avenues are available to them, to hold bureaus accountable, to continue to share their expertise, to make sure these projects and programs get implemented appropriately. And, I think that gives me a little bit more relief to know that other types of democratic processes can continue beyond this room. So I really lean on my committee members and the confidence they have in these proposals, given some caveats and some adjustments so that we can take on the next task.
Michael.
So I really appreciate what all my fellow committee members have had to say. We're talking about allocating, well, not quite $500 million, but $385 million in 2 weeks. It's that's wild to me. I do more debate on that when I buy something that's $10 off Amazon. But I don't have the only one that I really have any issues with is the power generation, the hydropower, because I am wondering, how the federal government isn't supporting hydropower and renewing with their licensing. The $6 million to get federal licensing when the federal government is pushing clean energy. I'm just not quite getting that. But other than that, I'm pretty on board with this. I'm hoping that in our next tranche of our next allocation tranche, that we look back at community-based organizations for that funding, for that additional money. And I also hope that we, look at what the city requires is maybe what we should require out of community-based organizations, right? The city's coming to us with, really big ideas and, sort of minimal information, which is kind of the opposite of what we require from our community-based organizations. And I trust community-based organizations far more than I trust my government. So I hope that we look at that and we can go back to all these additional guardrails and difficulties that we've put up for community-based organizations, and take another look at that, since PCEF was one of our founding things was that we wanted to make this accessible to communities that have been shut out of money before. And it's, as we put up more and more guardrails, it's become less and less accessible. But the government, the city, has come with some big ideas and some big dollar amounts with very little information. So if we can, tune that, fund them to the, for over $500 million, I hope that we can turn around and do that same thing for community-based organizations.
Alicia.
Thanks. I'll try to be brief. I share a lot of the concerns that the other committee members have already raised, and I have the same hopes to see the accountability measures that have already been proposed or agreed to going forward with these proposed projects. I would like to see some of the things that were omitted from this tranche, especially workforce-related prioritization, in the second or potentially third tranche. But other than that, I would feel comfortable moving forward with the caveats that have already been expressed.
Thank you, committee members. Sam, I'm turning it back over to you.
All right, we've been, thank you. Just thank you. This is incredibly rushed. And as Maria noted, this we've had to jump a lot as a group, and that is taxing. That is, I know, taxing on you all, and it has not been fair. And it is, I mean, this is the work that we've been put before us. And so it's through all of this, the promise of what PCEF still is there for every single one of us on our team, because we see the work that we are getting to do with community, and appreciate both the fact that that's going to have its tensions in terms of where we get placed and the asks that are made of us to continue doing that work, which has some of these sour moments. And yet there's still a lot of productive and amazing outcomes that can result from this. And so we've been working on language. I'm going to flip to the next slide, and I'm going to give you all just a few minutes to read the language to see if this is, and I'm stopping sharing so I can screen over to the decision slide here, and then I'm going to give you all a moment to read this. And let's see, let's expand it and have you read it. And actually, I'm going to have you read it where I can edit it in real time in case we need that. So let's do this. I'm going to try to make it as big as I can. Give everyone just a few minutes, and in Faith, what I will let us know if you can't read it, because we can pause and I'm going to actually just read it for everyone's sake. that may need us to read it, and then you all can visually also take it in. The first would be that you all would propose that the PCEF committee recommend amending the adopted climate investment plan to include allocation items 1 through 25, excluding item 6 as presented on slides 11 and 12 as strategic programs. And 2, that PCEF staff include mutually approved metrics, performance measures, eligible expenses, and reporting requirements in the interagency agreements with bureaus for each of the recommended allocation items. And PCEF committee review and provide feedback of draft interagency agreements prior to execution, and include a PCEF committee liaison in the annual review of bureau progress reports alongside PCEF staff to ensure alignment with interagency agreements prior to annual approval of budgets. And if any PCEF funds are leveraged for allocation item 5, no city funds can be used for expenses that challenge tribal nations' rights in the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission process. We're going to adjust that. I'm going to give you all a minute to take a listen.
Robin? Robin, you're on mute.
Sorry. For number 5, why do we have to limit that to FERC? Can't we just make a blanket statement that just, for any program that challenges tribal nations, rights?
I mean, I think, Robin, I think we're speaking to this particular item here. I think that I just want to acknowledge that this is the ask of this particular project. And I think if I can't speak to that, and you're opening up it may potentially open up a bigger thing that I just can't tying it to the ask. Anyways, I don't know, you can, but it's how do you want it to ultimately land on the other side? So, but it's a fair point.
I don't know the ramifications. I'm just saying, I think, not challenging tribal nations' rights is something that's aligned with, PCEF principles. So why limit it just to FERC? That's where I'm coming at, but I don't know the nuances of what this statement might, the broader implications. Maybe Paul or someone else can elucidate or enlighten me.
I don't think that this would come up in any other project, to be honest with you. The reason why it comes up here is just the nature of FERC relicensing processes. Whenever there's a dam in the Pacific Northwest, or actually anywhere in the nation that comes up for renewal, quite often tribes will assert their rights to cultural and natural resources, and then the owners of the dams will methodically challenge the tribe. So in this particular case, it is very clear that there would be a challenge to treaty rights or tribal rights to cultural and natural resources. That's just inherent with the work that's done. And so if the project moves forward, we're just asking that in this particular project that they don't use any PCEF funds for those challenges.
Thank you.
I would recommend leaving it the way it is.
Megan?
Yeah, I appreciated that back and forth on that. One reaction I have is I feel like the annual approval of budgets is fairly hidden down here for like a lot of committee members talked about. And I know that that staff desires a 5-year plan because it matches the climate investment plan and it gives cities some sense of where they're headed for ramp up, but it does feel a little hidden down there in 4. So I wonder if there's a way to sort of say, these are we're seeing these as sort of annual checked allocations in some way. That's a thought I have. And another thought, I don't know that it's language that goes in here, but it's something in what Faith said that really has been bothering me about this process is I think we're setting up a process by which the city will not fund climate stuff because they will just turn to PCEF to fund it going forward. And I'm concerned about that. I don't know, we'll put anything in here, but it's a little bit of just something about the expectation of these 5-year granting. I don't know if there's like another line to be very clear that this is a 5-year, this is the part of the CIP and these are not expected to continue or something.
I think if you've got suggestions, please, I welcome them. I think one, it's just even you know, even with the climate investment plan, as it states up here, we still execute it in parts and pieces. It's not like the plan is done. And it's the same way that now that we're rolling out, we're still going to head to city council to, you know, execute our contract, even going out for an RFP for many of these programs, we'll go to council. And so same thing every year, even though it's a 5-year allocation, every year there is a process by which we say, okay, we're in agreement with the next year's budget. And that's the checkpoint on the year to say, did you do what you said you were going to do? And so that's there. But if there's a better way to capture it, I encourage any suggestions. And then Megan, you hit it. I mean, that is the crux of it. It is, and I don't have a, you know, we don't have a, I just want to acknowledge you hit it in that we are very regularly talked about as anything comes up, PCEF. I think there will be a point in the future and a day and time when we are allocated, and this particular moment is challenging because we're not 10, 15 years in and our programming is humming along and there isn't somewhere to take because it's programmed. But until we are, this will always be a thing. And so process is ultimately where, you know, and I think that second allocation process is speaking to what happens next is the you know, I think what this moment has learned is we can never design ahead of time, and we can never be too ready because these things will happen. So.
Faith? Sam, I don't know if we lost Faith, so I'll just, if committee members, additional comments.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry about that. I just wanted to appreciate Megan for your comment, and it occurred to me an additional reframe came up, which is if we had enough money, wouldn't it be great if actually all the climate action in Portland had the PCEF objectives and priorities and guidelines associated with them? So, of course, we don't want PCEF to be an insurance bucket for any programs, and we don't want to set that expectation. But you know, it could be that it actually is in community's best interest if PCEF guidelines applied to all climate investment in the city.
So Sam, I just want to do a quick time check. You asked for an additional 20 minutes. It's now 5:30. Just checking in.
I think we're close. So folks, I think, I mean, I see Robin's hand, so I think we're close, and want to see if there is, you know, and maybe it's, I think, Tracy, I don't know if we can move to maybe a temperature check on what's in front of us here in a second after Robin's comment around Robin, or going around and seeing temperature check with folks. And then depending on that, potentially seeing if someone would like to put up a proposal.
Robin?
Yeah, just a quick question for number 4. Is that implicit in that statement is that if you know, an agency doesn't, you know, pass the criteria and doesn't get approval of budget, that, you know, we get to, for lack of a better word, claw back the funds and decide to do something else with it?
We would have to have a conversation. If there's nothing, everything is in the gray, right, Robin? I think it's like, if it's, you know, and I think what this does is it gives a checkpoint to say, whomever the committee member is on that body, staff, and the other bureau, to say why it's a conversation at that point, and they would be part of that, because it's got to be teased out. It's not a like, if the measures aren't happening, but it's a conversation. So this creates the space to have that conversation with a committee member or staff and the other bureau to say, what is happening here? And then there is a decision. It'd be a city decision of, do we not move forward, or do we move forward? And then we'd come to I expect we'd come to the committee and discuss it there, but it would be elevated. So it's a stopping point. It doesn't just automatically move forward, but it's a point where there's a discussion amongst those to say what's happening, what's not happening, why, and then that liaison can bring that to the committee, and you all can say, we want to hear from the bureau, but it's not like it's a place where it's calling for an explicit discussion.
So yeah, so if we were to claw back the money, there would be some explicit process that would happen, which this conversation could trigger.
That's exactly right. That's exactly
Okay.
right. Because it would have to be, Robin, what it have to be then is at that point, it would have to be a recommendation of city council to not continue. You know, we'd have to, I don't want to go too far. We'd have to figure out
Yep.
what the heck that is. But yes, it would trigger that. And when you say clawback, it just means that it's not going to get future funding. Clawback is taking, it wouldn't get any more, you know, it's each year to year. So it just wouldn't get any allocation for the following year or some sort of substantial adjustment.
Thank you.
Paul?
Thank you. I thank you for putting the text together, Sam. I think this is a really good start. I didn't say anything in here about the limitation of number of years. And I would like to see us recommending no more than 2 years of funding. The process that the city is going through with their proposals compared to what the community is going through right now with the current open grant opportunity is like night and day. There's no equity here on the contribution that the community is going through right now to put their proposals forward. Just getting to the point where the city contracts with an organization is a huge challenge. And then all the process with invoicing and payments and justification, and there's just no comparison to what's going on here. I don't see the equity in this process. Nobody does, but we can at least recommend that we put some sideboards here, some breaks, so that we don't have to go through this again, and just letting the city come forward with a spreadsheet and, you know, a few pages of justification is for 5 years of funding. It's just beyond the pale. I really recommend against a full 5 years funding. I feel really strongly about that. I don't know how other people feel about that, but now maybe the city is just going to do what they want anyway. But at least we could be on record as saying this process is not appropriate for a full 5 years of funding.
I think, Paul, the best I can is, I think the challenge is that we don't know what will work and what outright doesn't work with 1, 2, 3, or 5 years of funding. You know, some of these projects, as nature of just even their one-time projects, will take multiple years to move through. Then there's programming, and I think Bureau of Environmental Services may be good examples. I think a good portion of PBOT's work is more in that programming realm where it is year to year to year, like the maintenance of the streets, whereas that, you know, that approach would not necessarily work for either like a streetcar or a heat pump replacement or something else. And so I think that, I guess I just acknowledge, and I don't know if there's room there. I think the intent is for, you know, between really numbers 2, 3, and 4, that the combination of getting mutually approved metrics, performance measures, all expenses, that detail in an interagency, you all subsequently reviewing that prior to execution, providing feedback to that, and then having a committee member involved in the annual review alongside staff of how is this going, gives it's all the pieces to say that is this all tracking correctly? Where do things need to be right-sized or adjusted based again on those metrics, those performance measures? So I think we're trying to set the stage to get that subsequent level of detail on who's going to benefit, all of that stuff. But I think it's hard. I just want to name, I think it's hard in this point, at this moment, without going back and forth with the bureaus. And I get that this is a function of the process to limit it to 2 years. You know, there is a come back and have all the bureaus after a year share all their progress and have the bureau leadership share it in front of the, you know, I think there's different things we can do so, you know, bring that public accountability. But I just want to name that we'd have to be able to like tease out which ones that could work for and which ones that couldn't.
Well, there's a difference between an allocation of funding and a period of performance. So if an organization got $1 million grant, they might get 3 years to complete the project. But if we were to give an organization 5 years of funding at $1 million each, I mean, we would question that. It's like, can you really do that? And besides, you only gave us 5 or 10 sentences to justify your project. So, you know, I don't see why it's a problem to say you get 2 years of allocated funding. It could take you longer than 2 years to spend the money. I don't have a problem with that. But I just don't see why we have to allocate so much funding without having a clear process that is even at least a smidgen more equitable than what the organizations are going through right now.
I hear you, Paul. I don't have it's more speaking to just strictly that without going back and saying and kind of and really breaking down like this is, you know, it's the subsequent detail. What is the spend down year to year to year look like? And at this point, that's going to be a challenge. I mean, I can say even like the fleet update, and that is a transition, and it is a staffing up, and it is moving from electrifying the fleet at a rate of, you know, a dozen or so vehicles a year to a substantial rate. And that's a program that either happens or doesn't at this scale. And so I think what you can do is each year say, where is this? Because there's going to also be learnings along the way, but is this scaling up right? I mean,
Well, I'm not saying they can't get funded, Sam. We're just not going to promise it to them for 5 years. They can come back in a year with a really high quality proposal, one that really does meet all of our needs, that we are convinced as a committee fits all of our values. I'm just saying we don't have to do that today. But also, I hear that you're very clearly defending the city position here. But as a committee, we might decide to do something different. And I don't know if you're asserting yourself in a position that would not allow us to move our recommendation forward. I'm curious about where this conversation is going right now.
I will stop talking, Paul, then. Go for it.
I think we need to hear from other committee members.
Randface?
No, I appreciate the conversation here. You know, I think, yeah, you know, I am not in an informed position to change, like significantly change the proposal from, you know, 5 to 2 or 2 to 5 but I, you know, any opportunity I think that we can give power to the community and to the committee and how we make the proposal, like I'm very much supportive in exploring that. You know, couple things I'd like to offer here. One, like it'd be great to maybe add some explicit language here that we have an interim review of these projects in year 2. That enables us to do some site visits and get a report just how these projects are going, in addition to, I think, the annual reports that we'll get. And I think just being explicit on having a provision for clawback. I think that feels like a good compromise. You know, like I'm trying to take it here at face value. What Sam has shared, what Michael has shared in the past as well, and others have pointed out, like for some programs, like without clarity of funding, it'll be difficult to ramp up staff. But I think by adding a interim phase with some provisions around both clawback and site visits, like I think it still gives, you know, committee power to just, you know, if we need to do additional review or see these projects, you know, physically, like I think that's, you know, I think we want to offer that too. On 5, and this on a different tangent here. I would like for 5 to be a little bit more reflective. What's in addition to what's in city code that says that, you know, we wouldn't fund hydro projects if they had a potential impact to salmonids, as it's stated in there, or in addition to Paul's language here. So wanted consideration there. But beyond that, I think, Paul, I don't know if that's helpful, like suggestion, like addition there, if that gets you in a comfortable place. But I offer that as another like stopgap solution.
Well, I certainly appreciate that, and I'm open to any approach. I'm just not comfortable agreeing to 5 years of funding with such little information. And the process you've outlined is probably something that could work.
Robin?
Yeah, I think, you know, for me, my preference is also 2 years, but item number 4 here, largely satisfies my needs. Maybe I'm being a little bit naive, but as I said earlier, key for me are those interagency, agreements, and I like what Ramfis had just stated, and maybe a more formal 2-year process review, not just a check the box here, but a review in 2 years. Make it a big deal, so that it stands out. And maybe there's a way to get an independent third party like the city auditor involved with that process. And so it's not just us versus them, it's the city auditor saying, well, XYZ Bureau, you've met all your goals, congratulations, right? And or ABC bureaus is like, you miserably failed. And that's feedback that we could get and say, okay, the city auditors said you failed, and this is the criteria that we agreed to 2 years ago, and you haven't met that criteria. So our recommendation to the city council or whoever it is at that point is that we pull back your funding for the remaining 3 years. So a little bit more meat to number 4. So that's kind of my thoughts.
Okay. I'm Sam. Did you want to respond to Robin's comments?
Well, just what I want to add, and we're going to work on this, and we're working on adding language, seeing language here. We do have, and we are up for our next, we do have a requirement as a program for annual financial audits and in every other year biannual performance audits. And so we're working on language here, but we just want to note that every one of these programs will be subject to our financial audit. And that's did we follow generally accepted accounting principles in terms of tracking the funding, the objectives, and making sure there's alignment there. But then there's the performance audits that happen that are how well did we do meeting these objectives, and that's different from did you follow the rules in terms of how you spent money versus how well did you do. So we're thinking through that. I just want to note that that's already a requirement for the program wide, but there's areas and there's direction in which we can focus that. So we're working on language. Faith, go ahead, but I wanted to say that. To note that that's already a program requirement in our code for the entire program.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that. Thank you. The one other thing, and I like this idea of a more robust year 2 review. And I just want to be sure that we're including community in that. So I know that the committee is representative of community and that's why we exist, but having something more of a public process to review performance. Maybe it doesn't need to be on that annual performance review, but in this year 2, having a public meetings where performance is discussed in a formal way, so that we're acknowledging upfront that community will be engaged and have a view into how the city is performing. I don't know if that gives everyone heartburn, or particularly if it gives staff heartburn, but for me, that's a way of just acknowledging that we want community engagement and oversight into these programs, and so that we're sure that they deliver community benefit. So I think that might simply be in kind of an add-on to Ramfis's idea, and maybe it's already there, as you said, Sam, in our 2-year performance audit, but just some kind of a public meeting that airs that all out.
I think we can get to work on this. We're working on language right now. I think we can get to work on this, and we can call it a formal performance review of these particular city bureau projects that includes robust community engagement. I think, James, I'm adding it to a separate clause. Just we're tracking language right now. I'm adding it, James. I think it should be the separate clause as opposed to part of the one in number 4, just because it should be separate and distinct. And so I think we can. But we'll add that in. We'll just write it in the document so you can see what we're writing. And those that like to word edit with us, please word edit with us. Let's see.
Faith?
I realized I forgot something, and that was the clawback provision. We've been referring to that, I think, somewhat loosely in this conversation. And I assume that what we're talking about is a stop in funding and not an actual clawback of funding, which means that we would ask for the money back if they didn't hit performance. And I assume that would be a real problem on behalf of the city. maybe we don't care, but I would be comfortable with simply saying, you know, if you don't meet your performance targets, you don't get future funding.
Sorry, I agree with Faith. Sorry, I may have, yeah, you're right. I did use clawback loosely there. Okay, let's just add this in here so you all can visually see what is now becoming number 5. And this will be number 6. Engage in 2-year formal public review of performance of recommended allocation items. Okay, so just, and then, I mean, again, I want to make sure, Faith, as you're reading the second sentence, as our lawyer on the committee, there may be others on there, this latter clause of number 4, with interagency, you know, to ensure alignment with the interagency agreement prior to annual review, annual approval of future budgets, of subsequent budgets, is it prior to review of future of? Is that more explicit? Just because that's the pause prior to approving it. If a budget doesn't get approved, it doesn't get funded. That is where the stop in funding happens. Just want to name that. We budget annually, even for ongoing programs.
I'm not going to dare offer a legal opinion on this, but that language totally works for me. I think it's clear.
And Sam, I would just maybe add for 5 after community involvement, and where appropriate, site visits. Oh, sorry, y'all. Hey, the ball is in your court, folks.
Sam, at this point, what are you asking the committee to do, just to be clear on process? So
at this point, it would, I mean, if there needs to be a temperature check, it could be a temperature check. Someone could make a proposal, do a temperature check, and then, or someone could do a temperature check. Someone could make a proposal and then go around and see where the votes are for committee members.
So the temperature check is the vote?
Let's, if we're going to do it, if I guess I'm looking to Megan Ramphis, if you want to do a temperature check, or if you feel right now it's worth making if you want to make it'd be a temperature check before and then a proposal and then going around and hearing everyone's vote on the proposal.
Megan and Ramphis, how would you like to proceed?
Ramphis, I'll let you go since you've been a little bit more in the dialogue around this part.
Oh, I just, I'm really quickly, I do have one more edit for 6, and that's just no harm to salmonids or salmon. It's kind of in the code. We're kind of beholden to it. So I just wanted to make sure, in addition to expenses aren't used to challenge tribal nation rights in the FERC regulatory commission process, that we're also not harming salmon or salmonids as it's used, or as the word used in the project.
I'm looking at just if I can even reference the specific code, but maybe I'm looking just if I can copy and paste that language. Okay.
I just sent you the.
I'm fine. I found it
in the chat, but I guess while you're doing that, Sam, I'm comfortable if we just all do a temperature check given the language updates, and then happy to entertain a motion if we all feel collectively good with where the language is at. Megan, your thoughts?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right,
So-
Megan, let's start with you and then Brandfeast, and we'll then move through the list of committee members.
I appreciate the dialogue and I feel warm on the temperature check, if that's the right way to positive about voting.
Brandfeast?
Yeah, I feel warm. I feel better. Like, I think, I still want to hear from the rest of the committee where they're at here. Like, I know when we started this process, we knew it was not going to be perfect. And I felt like there were going to be opportunities that we could try to do and uplift community voices and leverage things that could be seen as potential wins around the process. So I feel like we've done some things here that I feel comfortable trying to take a vote today. But again, I'm look forward to other folks and their inputs here. Yeah, thanks.
Faith?
I'm ready to vote.
Paul?
I'm ready to vote, and I also want to thank the committee for hearing me out with my ideas. Sometimes it just gets the conversation going. But I am fine with this language, and I will vote in the affirmative to move this along. I'm like the rest of you, frustrated with where we're at, but the reality is we need to move forward. Thank you.
Robin?
I'm generally supportive of this. I'm just wondering if there's a way we can signal to the council that, for the next tranche that, we really want to focus our time and energy on community and nonprofits.
D'Angelo?
Vote in the affirmative.
D'Angelo, say that again, please, if it didn't come through quite.
I'm ready to vote in the affirmative. I appreciate the language that the committee put together, specifically about the requirements and the interagency agreements, the feedback, the review, just making sure that across this agreement that there is real accountability in how this is implemented and executed. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. Maria?
I can vote, although I'm still trying to process number 3, 4, and 5. I know we've done some editing live here, but just something about even the proposal giving more work to committee and community, that doesn't equate more power for community. It just gives community more work. So I think I'm always just going to be frustrated about community involvement when these words often feel really empty to me if we are not designing the process from the beginning or the program from the beginning with them to have actual power. And again, you've heard me say participatory budgeting where people have direct power over a given amount of resources and the whole process is designed with community in mind. That to me gives community power rather than doing more outreach and feedback, which is always subject to interpretation and the discretion of those in power. So I can live with this language here, but I know in wherever spaces where we can, we will continue to ask for just real accountability and genuine community involvement, which will actually translate into community power rather than just more dialogue and rounds of feedback that might not change a whole lot.
Michael?
I am properly tepid. But I am ready to vote.
Alicia?
Thank you. I'm ready to vote.
Sam, just turning it back to you for next steps.
Just now, a committee member needs to make the proposal, and then we can go around and you can either vote in the affirmative, you can vote no, or you can, James, now I'm going to look to you for help. You can stand aside. James, correct me.
Don't we have a
affirmative.
slide somewhere in our deck? that
We,
shows
we,
that?
we, we do. Let me just pull it up.
Yeah.
That this
You,
is all.
you can stand aside, but a stand aside vote, yeah, here it is.
Yeah, I
Still,
think it's
you can-
possible some of our committee
still
members.
counts as a
Yeah.
You can affirm the proposal, you can stand aside, you can indicate no, you do not support the proposal. Standing aside is counted as a decision to the affirmative for the purposes of approving the proposal.
Robin,
I move to, I don't know what the vote on this proposal. Someone maybe. pick the puppet.
Someone, well, I guess someone can, it's on the screen, it's on the record. I mean, but if someone wants to read it, it's never a bad idea for reading it.
Sam, there's a title right above number 1.
Oh, yeah.
Can you show us what the
Yeah.
title is?
Oh.
So we could take the word draft off, maybe. I think. But that would be your motion, right?
Yes, I move that we recommend the proposal as stated in the screen, items 1 through 6.
is there a second?
Second.
All right, and what I'll do, and I'll just go through each committee member and call on you. Paul, I'm just going in the order I see you on my screen. Paul, starting with you.
I'm going to turn my camera off next time. I vote affirmative. Thank you.
Robin,
Affirmative.
Ranfis,
Affirmative.
Megan,
Appreciating this collective deliberation and our efforts to do the best we can in this process, so I'm on the affirmative.
D'Angelo,
I vote in the affirmative.
Maria,
Or affirmative.
Michael,
Affirmative.
Alicia,
Affirmative.
Faith,
I approve.
well, the vote has been taken. Sam,
Okay. The proposal passes. Congratulations, folks. I was like not counting to make sure everyone's gotten through there. So thank you. Maria, you said it well. This is, this isn't necessarily more power to the community. And this is more work, as much as we try to get away from more work. But this is more work. It's the right work. And as imperfect as this is, we're going to continue to learn. And I fundamentally believe that there is a tremendous amount of good that will come of this, mistakes that we will learn along the way, that you all will be with us, or your future, the future you alls will be with us as we learn with this. And at the same end, this is something that ensures that this work does continue to happen with the city, that it isn't continuously in that sense, like as imperfect as this is, as city-centered as this is, and not in quite always the feeling of PCEF, this ensures this work does happen. And for all of the good we've done, where this is not about resting on the laurels, but always continuing to do this good and doing it better. So I thank you all. I thought we needed 3 hours for this meeting, but doodling for you all was incredibly challenging. And so I suppose this works out how it did, but it's Friday evening. You all need to be elsewhere, and I just appreciate all your time and your dedication to this work. Thank you.
Megan,
Yeah, just before we quick close, thank you, committee. It's like not as joyous of as an affirmative vote as I think we felt after the CIP. And I think that our deliberations will be continuing with the city supposedly wants to bring a tranche 2, but I think we have so take some time to rebound. And I think Ramfis and I would love to hear from you about that as we help shape that discussion. Because I think we've learned a lot from this that can help us set a better process so that doesn't look like what it just did. So please, yeah, let's ramp up for that. Even though I'm sure you want a nap.
Yeah, just to echo what Megan just said, definitely just committed to just keep advocating, given I think conversations of another tranche here that we make sure the conversations that we've had today are reflected about just being more proactive, making sure the process is better in the front end, and that we're balancing the interest of community. So I think definitely going to take to heart everything we've been saying for the last couple meetings, and I think that message I hope is clear for the city. So I expect that advocacy as us as co-chairs, and we'll lean on each and every one of you to make sure we get those values reflected in the next successive tranches.
All right, everyone, have a great weekend, get some rest, and we'll be back at it February 15th, correct, Sam?
Correct. Correct. 2
Night-night.
weeks. Enjoy some space away from us. Good night, y'all.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you all. Good night.
Bye. Enjoy your camping.
Night.